Hello, welcome to the channel. Before starting the story, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. It's very important to me. Also, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button. All of this because Emily stood at the edge of the canyon, the crisp mountain air filling her lungs as she took in the breathtaking view before her. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden rays over the rugged landscape of the Rocky Mountain National Park. She could see the jagged cliffs, the vibrant greens of the pine trees, and the winding river below, all illuminated in a warm glow that seemed almost magical. It was a scene she had witnessed countless times, yet it never failed to inspire her enthusiasm. "Welcome, everyone, to one of nature's most remarkable wonders," she said, her voice ringing out with warmth and excitement. The group of tourists, a diverse mix of families, couples, and adventurers, gathered around her, their faces reflecting a blend of awe and anticipation. Emily was a seasoned tour guide, her passion for the canyon palpable in every word she spoke. She had a talent for storytelling, weaving together the canyon's history, geology, and folklore in a way that captivated her audience. "Did you know that this canyon was carved by ancient glaciers over thousands of years?" she continued, gesturing dramatically toward the steep walls that towered above them. "It's a testament to the power of nature. And if you listen closely, you can hear the echoes of the past, quite literally." With a playful grin, Emily cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted, "Hello!" The word bounced off the canyon walls, returning to her in a crisp, clear echo. The group erupted in laughter, the sound dancing through the air, mingling with the natural beauty surrounding them. "Try it out," she encouraged, pointing to a young girl with curly hair. "Go ahead, shout something." The girl hesitated for a moment, then shouted, "I love ice cream." Her voice reverberated back, slightly distorted. "I love ice cream. I love ice cream." The group laughed again, their spirits lifting as they joined in, filling the canyon with their voices. Emily felt a surge of joy. The canyon was alive with their laughter, a shared experience that connected them all. However, as the echoes continued to bounce back, something shifted in the atmosphere. Emily noticed a faint tremor in the tone of the returning sounds. It was subtle at first, a slight distortion that sent a shiver down her spine. She shook it off, attributing it to her imagination, but the laughter of the group began to feel uneasy, as if the echoes were not just playful sounds, but something deeper, something unsettling. "Let's try a different sound," Emily suggested, eager to redirect the energy. "How about a roar? Everyone, on the count of 3, let's roar like bears. 1, 2, 3. Roar," they all shouted in unison. The sound was powerful, reverberating through the canyon, but as it echoed back, it transformed. Instead of the joyful, playful return she expected, the roar morphed into something distorted and eerie. It came back as a low, guttural sound that seemed to resonate with an undercurrent of dread. Emily's heart raced as she felt the air grow heavy, the mood of the group shifting from playful to tense. "What was that?" a man murmured, glancing nervously at his companion. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach, the laughter of the tourists replaced by an uneasy silence. She tried to maintain her composure, forcing a smile as she glanced at her audience. "It's just the acoustics of the canyon," she reassured them, though her voice wavered slightly. "It can play tricks on your ears." But the more she spoke, the more her own heart pounded in her chest. She took a deep breath, attempting to steady herself, and decided to change the subject. "Let's take a closer look at the formations over here," she said, gesturing to a nearby rock face covered in ancient carvings, As the group moved closer, Emily felt a strange tension in the air. The echoes continued to bounce around them, but now they seemed to carry an edge, as if whispering secrets meant only for her. She shook her head, trying to dispel the feeling. It was just her imagination, she told herself. What do those carvings mean? A woman with bright red hair asked, breaking the silence. They're thought to be left by early Native American tribes, Emily replied, her voice steadying as she focused on the task at hand. Each symbol tells a story, of hunting, of the seasons, of the spirits of the land. This canyon has been a sacred place for centuries. Emily's words hung in the air as the group studied the carvings, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whispers and the echoes grew louder, weaving through her thoughts. She felt as though the canyon itself was alive, watching her, listening to her every word. Is anyone else hearing that? A young man named Jack asked, his brow furrowed. It sounds like... I don't know, like it's saying something. Unease rippled through the group as they exchanged glances. It's probably just the wind, Emily said quickly, though her voice lacked conviction. Let's keep moving, there's more to see. As they trekked further along the canyon's edge, Emily's laughter faltered, replaced by an unsettling sense of foreboding. The echoes grew louder, and she could no longer ignore the way they twisted and morphed into disconcerting sounds. With every shout, every laugh, her voice returned in a way that felt wrong, as if the canyon was mocking her. Emily, did you hear that? Jack asked again, this time more insistent. It's like the echoes are different. Yeah, it's really weird, another tourist chimed in, her eyes wide with fear. It's like they're distorted. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. It's just the acoustics, she repeated, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Let's just focus on the beauty around us. The canyon is extraordinary. Yet, as she spoke, her laughter echoed back to her, twisted and sinister, sending a wave of panic crashing over her. The tourists were now looking at her with a mix of confusion and concern. She could feel their eyes on her, their uncertainty feeding her own rising fear. Maybe we should head back, one of the mothers suggested, glancing anxiously at her children. No, wait, Emily said, trying to regain control of the situation. We can't leave yet. There's so much more to explore. Just as she finished her sentence, a sudden gust of wind swept through the canyon, whipping her hair around her face. It carried with it a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. The echoes of their voices twisted into a cacophony of whispers, swirling around them, each one more disorienting than the last. Emily, I really think we should go, Jack insisted, his voice rising above the chaos. All right, let's head back, she finally conceded, her heart racing. As they turned to retrace their steps, the echoes grew louder, filling the canyon with a chilling resonance that left her breathless. Why do I feel like we're being watched? A woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the haunting sounds. Emily's skin prickled with unease. You're not alone, she admitted, her own voice shaking. The laughter that had once echoed joyously now felt like a taunt, a reminder of how quickly things had turned. As they hurried back, the canyon seemed to close in around them, the walls looming ominously as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The once vibrant colors of the landscape faded into shadow, and the echoes morphed into a haunting chorus that reverberated in Emily's mind. She could scarcely make sense of it all. The joy of the day had turned into something darker, something that lingered long after they had departed the canyon. Did you feel that? Jack asked, glancing back at her, his expression a mixture of fear and concern. Yes, Emily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I did. As they reached the parking lot, the last rays of sunlight disappeared, leaving the world cloaked in darkness. The group dispersed, their laughter replaced by nervous chatter. Emily's heart felt heavy as she watched them go, the weight of the echoes still echoing in her thoughts. Each distorted sound seemed to carry an unsettling weight, a lingering reminder of the canyon's secrets. Are you okay? Jack asked, staying back as the others left. Yeah, I'm fine, she replied, though she knew it was a lie. It was just a strange day, I guess. Jack studied her for a moment, his gaze piercing through her facade. It felt more than strange, didn't it? Like something was off. Emily nodded, her heart racing as she considered the echoes that had haunted her all day. I don't know what it was, she confessed, her voice trembling. But I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right about that canyon. As they stood in the parking lot, the darkness wrapped around them like a shroud. Emily realized that the echoes had awakened something deep within her, a fear that she had long buried. The canyon had revealed a truth she was not ready to confront, and as she looked back toward the looming cliffs, she knew that this was only the beginning of her journey. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain of Rocky Mountain National Park. Emily stood at the edge of the canyon, her heart still racing from the unsettling echoes that had erupted moments earlier. The tourists, who had once been captivated by her enthusiasm, now wore expressions of confusion and fear. Their eyes darted nervously as the atmosphere thickened with an unexplainable tension. Emily's laughter, which had earlier bounced joyfully off the canyon walls, had morphed into something twisted, almost sinister. Everyone, please stay calm, Emily urged, her voice trembling slightly as she clutched her clipboard, a flimsy shield against the growing unease. It's just the acoustics of the canyon. I promise, it's perfectly normal. But as she spoke, the echoes continued to taunt her, distorting her words and returning them with an eerie reverberation. It was as if the canyon itself was mocking her attempts to reassure the group. Did you hear that? A voice piped up from the crowd, breaking the tense silence. It was Jack, a tall man in his 30s with tousled hair and a look of incredulity etched across his face. It sounded like it was laughing at us. That's not possible, another tourist interjected, her voice shaky. It's just an echo, right? Like a trick of the sound waves? Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had been a tour guide for years, and she had seen her fair share of oddities in the canyon, but this felt different. The echoes were escalating, morphing into unsettling whispers that seemed to crawl into the minds of her group. Each laugh returned to her in a distorted manner, amplifying the tension that hung in the air like a thick fog. Let's just move a little further, Emily suggested, trying to sound more confident than she felt. There's a beautiful viewpoint just ahead. I promise you'll love it. But as they walked, the whispers grew louder, weaving through the group like a sinister breeze. Each footstep seemed to disturb the shadows, and Emily could feel the weight of their fear pressing down on her. Why does it feel like it's getting closer? Jack asked, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to see something lurking behind them. It's just the acoustics, Emily repeated, though she doubted her own words. The canyon's shape can amplify sounds in strange ways. Just focus on the view. As they rounded a bend, the canyon opened up into a vast expanse, but the beauty was lost on the group. Instead, they stood frozen, eyes wide, as the echoes continued to twist and turn around them. Emily could see their discomfort, she could feel it. The once vibrant colors of the canyon seemed to fade into muted tones, and the air felt charged with an unspoken dread. "Look!" A woman pointed towards the mouth of the canyon, where shadows danced ominously. "It's like they're watching us." Emily's heart raced as she followed the woman's gaze. There was nothing there, just the craggy rocks and the deep blue sky, but the sensation of being observed sent chills down her spine. "Okay, let's just take a moment to breathe," Emily encouraged, trying to pull her group from the brink of panic. "Let's all close our eyes and listen to the sounds of nature. Just focus on the wind and the birds." As they closed their eyes, the whispers grew louder, morphing into a cacophony of indistinct voices that clawed at Emily's sanity. She could feel her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, drowning out the sounds of the world. The laughter, once a source of joy, now echoed back to her, each peal twisted into a mockery of her own. "Emily?" Jack's voice broke through the chaos, laced with concern. "Are you okay?" She opened her eyes, startled. Yes, I'm fine. Just breathe." But even as she said it, she could see the fear etched on Jack's face, the way his brow furrowed deeply as he glanced around, searching for something in the shadows. "Can we go back?" someone else asked, their voice barely above a whisper. "I don't like this." "Let's just try to make it to the viewpoint," Emily insisted, desperation creeping into her tone. "It's just a little further, and then we can head back." But as they moved again, the air felt thick with tension, and Emily could feel her own fear bubbling beneath the surface. The whispers had begun to morph into something more personal, reflecting the group's anxieties and insecurities. "Why are we even here?" Jack's voice trembled. "This was supposed to be a fun tour, and now it feels like we're trapped in a horror movie." Emily turned to him, her heart aching at the uncertainty in his eyes. "It's just the canyon playing tricks on us," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We're all safe, I promise." But even as she spoke, the air grew heavier, and she felt an almost palpable sense of dread. The canyon, with its jagged edges and deep shadows, felt alive, as if it were feeding on their fear. "Maybe we should just shout," Jack suggested, his voice rising with frustration. "If it's just echoes, we should be able to drown it out, right?" "Shout?" Emily echoed, glancing at the others. "I don't know if that's a good idea. Come on, what do we have to lose?" Jack countered, his eyes brightening with a hint of defiance. "On 3, we all shout as loud as we can. Maybe it will break the spell." The group hesitated, glancing at one another as doubt filled the air. But Jack's determination was infectious. Emily felt a flicker of hope. "All right, let's do it," she said, rallying the group. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. They shouted, their voices merging into a chaotic symphony that bounced off the canyon walls. But instead of dissipating the tension, the echoes returned, louder and more distorted than before. Each shout twisted back into a cacophony of their own fears, shadows of doubt, regrets, and insecurities that clawed at the edges of their minds. "Stop! Stop!" someone cried, clutching their head as if trying to block out the noise. "Emily, what's happening?" Jack asked, his eyes wide with panic. "I don't know," she confessed, her voice rising in pitch. "It shouldn't be like this." The whispers escalated, drowning out their voices, weaving tales of despair that echoed through the canyon like a dark symphony. Emily felt the weight of her own fears crashing down upon her. What had started as an innocent tour had spiraled into something far more sinister than she could have ever anticipated. "We need to go," Jack shouted, his voice barely breaking through the din. "Follow me," Emily yelled, leading the group back the way they had come, her heart pounding in her chest. The darkness of the canyon seemed to close in around them, shadows shifting and swirling as they hurried along the path, desperate to escape the cacophony of their own fears. As they fled, the echoes turned into a relentless storm of distorted sound, each whisper clawing at Emily's mind. It was a haunting reminder of everything she had tried to leave behind, a cacophony of regret and unfulfilled dreams that threatened to swallow her whole. "Emily!" Jack yelled, his voice strained as they stumbled through the shadows. "We'll make it out. Just keep moving." But the whispers surged around them, twisting into a sinister chorus that echoed their doubts and fears, wrapping around them like a suffocating shroud. Emily felt her resolve wavering, her heart heavy with the weight of the canyon's secrets. Suddenly, she stopped in her tracks, breathless and terrified. "What if it's not just the canyon?" she whispered, the words spilling from her lips. "What if it's us?" "What do you mean?" Jack asked, confusion written across his face. "The echoes, they're reflecting our fears back at us." Maybe it's trying to tell us something," she murmured, her mind racing as the realization settled in. The canyon wasn't just a backdrop, it was a mirror, revealing the deepest, darkest corners of their souls. "Then we need to face it," Jack said resolutely, taking a step forward. "We can't let it control us." Emily nodded, steeling herself against the rising tide of fear. "Together," she said, her voice steadier now. "We face it together." As they prepared to confront the echoes, the atmosphere shifted again, and the whispers grew softer, almost curious. It was as if the canyon was waiting, holding its breath for what was to come. The shadows danced around them, and for the first time, Emily felt a flicker of understanding. Perhaps the canyon wasn't merely a source of fear, it was a place of revelation, urging them to confront their truths. "Let's go," she said, determination flooding her veins. "We'll find out what it wants from us." And with that, they stepped deeper into the canyon, ready to face the echoes that awaited them, ready to uncover the mysteries that lay hidden in the shadows. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the rugged terrain of Rocky Mountain National Park. Emily adjusted her backpack, its weight a familiar burden, yet today it felt heavier somehow, as if the very air around her thickened with an unnameable tension. She scanned the canyon, its steep walls rising like ancient sentinels, silent and imposing. The earlier tour had left her shaken, the echoes of her laughter still reverberating in her mind, twisted and distorted. As she walked along the narrow path, Emily spotted Jack sitting on a rock, his brow furrowed in thought. He looked up as she approached, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Hey, Emily," he greeted, his voice steady but tinged with an underlying tremor. "I've been waiting for you. Can we talk about what happened back there?" "Yeah," she replied, taking a seat beside him. The rock was cool against her skin, but the chill in the air seemed to seep deeper, coiling around her heart. She exhaled slowly, searching for the right words to describe the inexplicable dread that had settled in her chest. It was different today. The echoes felt wrong. Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the canyon. "I know what you mean. At first, it was just a fun demonstration, but then, it changed. The laughter, the whispers, it was like they were reflecting our fears." He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "Did you feel it too?" It was as if the canyon was alive. Emily swallowed hard, recalling the way her laughter had twisted back to her, a sinister mockery of her joy. "Yes." It felt personal, like it was probing into our minds, revealing our insecurities. Jack shifted, his shoulders tensing. I want to understand it better. Do you think we could explore the canyon more? Maybe if we hike deeper, we can find out what's causing this phenomenon. The idea sent a shiver through Emily, a mixture of intrigue and fear. She hesitated, glancing at the darkening sky. I'm not sure it's wise. We could get lost, or worse, we won't get lost, he interrupted, his voice firm. We can stick to the trails. Besides, I feel like we owe it to the group to understand what happened. We can't just let this go. His conviction stirred something within her, a flicker of curiosity battling against the fear that had taken root. Okay, she replied slowly, but let's be careful. They set off together, the path ahead winding into the depths of the canyon, where the sunlight barely penetrated. The shadows grew longer, and the air felt electric, charged with an energy that resonated with Emily's unease. As they walked, the echoes of their footsteps bounced off the canyon walls, but the sounds felt muted, as if the canyon was holding its breath. What do you think causes echoes like that? Jack asked, breaking the silence. I've read that it's all about the geological formations and the atmospheric conditions, Emily explained, her voice barely above a whisper. But today, it felt like something more. Like the canyon was a conduit for our fears. Jack stopped, turning to face her. You believe in that? That the canyon somehow knows us? Knows our fears? Emily shrugged, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. I don't know. But the way it echoed back at us, it was as if it was taunting us, pulling our darkest thoughts right out into the open. I've never felt anything like it before. They hiked deeper into the wilderness, the sounds of their conversation fading into the distance, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. Yet, the deeper they ventured, the more the atmosphere shifted. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, but a storm began to gather on the horizon, casting ominous clouds across the sky. Looks like we might get some rain, Jack observed, glancing up. We should probably turn back soon. Emily nodded, but a part of her felt drawn forward, as if the canyon itself was beckoning them deeper into its embrace. Just a little further? She suggested, her voice barely audible over the rising wind. I want to see what's beyond this next bend. Jack hesitated, glancing back toward the trail they had come from. Okay, but let's not stray too far. We don't want to be caught out here in a storm. They pressed on, the wind picking up, swirling around them with a sinister whisper. Emily felt it wrap around her like a cold hand, urging her to turn back, yet she pushed forward, curiosity mingling with dread. As they rounded the bend, the canyon opened up into a small clearing, its walls towering above them like ancient giants. Suddenly, the first drops of rain began to fall, plummeting from the darkening sky. We should find shelter. Jack shouted over the wind, his eyes wide with urgency. Over there. Emily pointed to a small overhang, a natural alcove carved into the rock. They sprinted toward it, the rain intensifying, drumming on the stone like a frantic heartbeat. They huddled beneath the overhang, breathless and drenched, the storm raging outside. As they caught their breath, the echoes seemed to change, morphing into something more profound. The sound of the rain falling against the ground echoed back at them, but intertwined within it was a disconcerting melody, a cacophony of voices that seemed to rise from the canyon itself. Do you hear that? Jack asked, his voice a mix of fear and fascination. Emily nodded, her heart racing. It's different. It's like the canyon is singing. But the melody was distorted, twisting into familiar tones that wrapped around her like a shroud. Laughter, whispers, and cries melded into a haunting symphony, echoing back her own thoughts, her insecurities, her doubts. The laughter she had once emitted now returned as a chilling mockery, reverberating in her mind with every drop of rain. Emily. Jack's voice broke through the chaos, snapping her back to the present. Are you okay? She blinked, startled. I don't know. It feels like the canyon is reaching into my mind, pulling out everything I've tried to hide. Maybe it's just the echoes playing tricks on us, he suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. We should focus on getting back. But the storm outside seemed to intensify, the echoes growing louder, drowning out their thoughts. No! Emily shouted, her voice rising in panic. We need to stay. We have to understand what's happening. Jack's expression darkened with concern. Emily, we can't just sit here. We're in danger. We're safer here than out there, she snapped, frustration bubbling to the surface. You don't understand what it's like to hear your own fears echoed back at you. The tension between them crackled in the air, but before Jack could respond, a particularly loud clap of thunder shook the ground beneath them. The very walls of the canyon trembled, and the echoes grew louder, a chorus of distorted laughter and whispers drowning out the storm. Emily! Jack shouted, gripping her shoulders. Listen to me. We need to focus on finding a way back. The echoes, they're just sounds. We can't let them get to us. But as he spoke, the echoes morphed again, swirling around them with a life of their own. Emily felt the weight of her own doubts pressing down on her. What if it's more than that? She whispered, her voice barely audible above the cacophony. What if the canyon is trying to tell us something? What if it's a warning? Jack's eyes widened, and for a moment, they were locked in a silent battle of wills, one seeking to escape, the other drawn deeper into the mysterious call of the canyon. The storm raged on outside, but within their small alcove, the echoes swirled around them, a tempest of sound that threatened to consume them both. Let's just try to find a way back, Jack urged again, his voice firm but tinged with desperation. But as Emily looked into the depths of the canyon, she felt an unshakable pull, a connection to something ancient and powerful that lay just beyond their reach. She realized that the echoes were not merely reflections of fear, they were a bridge to understanding, to confronting the very essence of who she was. Jack, I think I need to stay, she said softly, her voice trembling. I need to confront this. I can't run from it anymore. The storm outside continued to rage, the echoes of the canyon wrapping around them like a living entity, urging her forward into the depths of her own fears and truths. Jack's eyes reflected a mixture of worry and understanding, and as the realization settled between them, Emily knew that this was just the beginning of a journey that would forever change her relationship with the canyon and herself. Emily sat at her cluttered kitchen table, her laptop open before her, surrounded by stacks of books and papers that spoke of the canyon's geological wonders. The echoes still haunted her, a constant reminder of that fateful day when laughter had twisted into something sinister. With each keystroke, she felt an odd mix of determination and dread. She needed answers. She needed to understand what had happened in that canyon. Great acoustics, she murmured to herself, recalling how she had once joyfully explained the phenomenon to tourists. Natural amphitheaters. She sighed, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. Those terms, once a source of pride, had become ominous reminders of her unraveling. The sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow that felt almost mocking against the chill in her heart. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes, and the memories washed over her. The laughter of the tourists, the way it had echoed back at her, distorted and grotesque. Emily shook her head, trying to dispel the thoughts. She had to focus on the research, on the facts. "Okay, let's see what you've got," she said to herself, opening a thick book titled Geological Acoustics of the Rockies. As she flipped through the pages, her mind wandered back to Jack. He had been as affected by the echoes as she was, and their shared fear had created an unexpected bond. He had suggested looking into the canyon's history, the legends tied to the land. Maybe he was right, she whispered, glancing at the phone on the table, half expecting it to ring. But it remained silent, just like the canyon had been after she left her job as a guide. The thought of returning there filled her with an unsettling mix of nostalgia and fear. The door creaked open, pulling her from her thoughts. Emily? It was her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who often checked in on her. "I brought you some cookies. I thought you could use a treat." Emily forced a smile, grateful for the small gesture. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. You're too kind." She took the plate of cookies, inhaling the sweet scent. It reminded her of simpler times, of childhood and laughter, memories that now felt tainted. "Still working on that canyon, I see?" Mrs. Henderson asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Yeah, trying to make sense of it all," Emily replied, her voice tinged with fatigue. "It's just complicated." "I can only imagine," Mrs. Henderson said, her brow furrowing slightly. "You were always so passionate about it. Just make sure you don't lose yourself in there." Emily nodded, biting into a cookie. The sweetness was comforting, yet it felt like a temporary balm over a festering wound. "I won't, I promise." After Mrs. Henderson left, Emily returned to her research. She discovered that the canyon's unique shape and geological formations could create echoes that distorted sound waves, but there was something deeper, something unsettling that she couldn't quite grasp. Hours turned into days as she scoured articles, studies, and folklore. She found references to Native American legends about the canyon, tales of lost souls and spirits trapped within the rocks. One particular story caught her attention. It spoke of a place where the echoes of the past could reveal a person's deepest fears and regrets. "Is that what happened to me?" she asked aloud, her voice trembling. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She recalled the way her laughter had morphed into something sinister, how the echoes had seemed to mock her. "I need to know more," she concluded, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and curiosity. That evening, as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows danced across her bedroom walls, twisting and turning as if alive. She closed her eyes tightly, willing herself to sleep, but the echoes from the canyon invaded her mind, whispering her insecurities and fears. "Emily. Emily," they seemed to call, each repetition pulling her deeper into a well of anxiety. "Stop it," she shouted into the darkness, her voice echoing back, a cruel reminder of her helplessness. "It's just a sound. It's just echoes." But the echoes didn't stop, they ramped up, filling her mind with memories of failure and rejection, of dreams unfulfilled. She pulled the blankets over her head, hoping to drown out the relentless whispers. Days turned into weeks, and her paranoia grew. She ventured out less, avoiding the canyon like it was a living entity, a predator waiting to pounce. Her phone calls with Jack became sporadic, filled with awkward pauses and half-hearted reassurances. One afternoon, she received a message from him. "Hey, Emily, I've been looking into some old legends about the canyon. Can we meet? I think I've found something interesting. Emily's heart raced. Part of her yearned for the connection they had formed, a shared understanding of the terror they had experienced. But another part of her screamed for her to stay away, to protect herself from whatever darkness lay in that canyon. She paced her living room, the weight of indecision heavy on her shoulders. Finally, she typed a response. Sure, let's meet. They agreed to meet at a local cafe, a cozy little place filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. As she entered, Emily scanned the room, spotting Jack at a corner table, his brow furrowed in concentration as he flipped through a worn notebook. Hey there, she said, sliding into the chair across from him. Hey, Emily, he replied, his voice warm yet tinged with concern. How have you been? Surviving, she said with a weak smile. You? Curious, he admitted, leaning forward. I've been digging into some of the canyon's history, and I think there's more to the echoes than we realized. Emily felt a mix of excitement and dread. What did you find? Jack opened his notebook, revealing pages filled with sketches and notes. There are stories about the canyon that go back centuries. It was considered sacred ground by the native tribes. They believed that the echoes were the voices of their ancestors, warning them or guiding them. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Guiding them? Or tormenting them? Maybe both, Jack replied, his eyes piercing into hers. There's a legend about a spirit who lingers in the canyon, someone who reflects the fears of those who enter. It's like the canyon holds up a mirror to your soul. Emily shivered at his words, the implications settling heavily on her chest. I don't know if I can handle that, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. What if it's a way to confront those fears? Jack suggested, his tone gentle yet insistent. What if the echoes are trying to tell us something? Emily clenched her fists, fighting the urge to flee. What if they're just echoes, Jack? Just sounds that come back to haunt us. He reached across the table, placing a hand over hers. You know it's more than that. We both felt it. Maybe facing it is the only way to reclaim our lives. The warmth of his hand sent a jolt through her, igniting a flicker of courage deep within. You think we should go back? I think we need to, he replied, determination shining in his eyes. Together. Emily hesitated, the fear of the canyon looming large in her mind. But beneath that fear lay a yearning for resolution, for understanding. Okay, she finally said, her voice steadier than she felt. Let's do it. As they left the cafe, a storm began to brew on the horizon. Dark clouds rolled in, casting an ominous shadow over the landscape. Emily's heart raced, a mixture of excitement and dread surging through her. Looks like we'll have some weather, Jack remarked, glancing up at the sky. Great, Emily muttered, her anxiety deepening. Just what we need. They drove towards the canyon, the wind picking up and the first drops of rain beginning to fall. The road twisted through the mountains, and Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach as they approached the familiar trailhead. Are you ready? Jack asked, his voice steady despite the brewing storm. No, she admitted, her heart pounding in her chest. But as they stepped onto the path, she felt a strange sense of purpose wash over her. As they hiked deeper into the canyon, the echoes of their footsteps seemed to vanish into the thickening air. The storm clouds loomed overhead, casting a shadow that felt almost alive. Each step brought her closer to the heart of the canyon, and with it, the echoes she had feared. The rain began to pour, a torrential downpour that sent them scrambling for shelter beneath an overhang. The sound of raindrops hitting the ground was deafening, drowning out everything but the growing intensity of the storm. "Stay close," Jack shouted over the roar of the rain, his eyes scanning the surroundings. As they huddled together, the echoes outside morphed into something else, a cacophony of distorted laughter, whispers, and cries. Emily's breath quickened, her heart racing as the memories flooded back. "It's just the storm," she whispered, though her voice trembled with doubt. "Listen," Jack urged, his expression intense. "Do you hear it?" The echoes outside Emily sat across from the local historian, her fingers nervously tapping on the wooden table that had seen countless meetings like this. The small, dimly lit room in the back of the old library smelled of dust and aged paper, a stark contrast to the vibrant, sunlit canyons she had grown to love and fear. The historian, a weathered man named Harold, studied her with a mix of curiosity and concern. "So, you've heard about the echoes," he began, his voice low and gravelly, as if it had been shaped by the very stones of the canyon itself. His eyes, sharp and knowing, bore into Emily's. "They're not just sounds, you know. They're something more." Emily swallowed hard, her heart racing at the thought. The echoes that had frightened her during the tour were still fresh in her mind, twisted laughter, distorted whispers that seemed to peel back layers of her very being. "What do you mean by something more?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might summon the echoes back to life. Harold leaned closer, lowering his voice. "The canyon has a reputation. It echoes the fears of those who visit. It's tied to ancient folklore about lost souls wandering these lands, seeking closure, seeking acknowledgement of their pain. The echoes can manifest your deepest regrets and fears." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard tales of the canyon's legends during her training as a tour guide, but she had dismissed them as mere stories meant to captivate tourists. Now, sitting before Harold, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was truth in his words. "But why? Why does it do that?" she pressed, her mind racing with the implications. He sighed, his gaze drifting to the window where the golden light of the setting sun cast long shadows. "The canyon is alive in a way that we cannot fully understand. The rock formations, the way the wind moves through the fissures, they create an environment that can amplify not just sound, but emotion. Some believe that the echoes are the voices of those who have suffered here, trapped in the canyon, yearning to be heard." Emily's thoughts drifted back to that day with the tourists, the way her laughter had twisted into something unrecognizable. I felt like it was mocking me. Like it knew my fears," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Harold nodded, his expression grave. "That's the way it often works. The canyon reflects back to us what we try to hide. It can reveal truths we're not ready to face." He paused, scrutinizing her. "You have something you're running from, don't you?" Emily's pulse quickened. She had buried her past under layers of professionalism and enthusiasm, but the canyon had unearthed it, exposing her vulnerabilities. "I've made mistakes," she confessed, her throat tightening. "When I laugh, I feel like I'm pretending. Like I'm not being true to myself." "Then perhaps," Harold suggested gently, "the echoes are calling you to confront those truths. To acknowledge what you've buried instead of running from it." The weight of his words settled heavily in the air between them. Emily felt a flicker of anger rise within her. "But I don't want to be haunted by my past. I want to move forward. Why can't I just escape it?" Harold leaned back, his hands steepled as he regarded her thoughtfully. You can run, but the echoes will always follow you. They're a part of you now, a reminder of what you need to face. Leaving your job won't silence them, it will only push them deeper into the shadows. Emily stared at him, her mind whirling. She thought about the tourists, the joy she'd felt in guiding them through the wild beauty of the Rocky Mountains. But now, the echoes had tainted that joy, transforming it into a source of dread. What should I do? She asked, feeling lost. Listen to the echoes, Harold advised, his voice steady. Embrace them. Allow yourself to feel what they bring up for you. Only then will you find peace. But how can I do that? She questioned, her voice breaking. They terrify me. Start by revisiting the canyon, he suggested. Go back to the place where it all began. Stand at the edge and let the echoes wash over you. Acknowledge what you hear. It may be painful, but it's the only way to find your truth. Emily nodded slowly, contemplating his words. It felt like a daunting task, but perhaps it was necessary. Perhaps the canyon had something to teach her that she had yet to understand. I'll think about it, she finally said, her voice steadier than before. As she left the library, the sun had dipped low, casting an orange hue over the town. The air felt different, charged with an energy that both excited and frightened her. As she walked through the streets, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the echoes were still with her, whispering in her ear, urging her to confront her past. The next day, she found herself standing at the canyon's edge, the familiar view spreading out before her like a postcard. The vibrant colors of the rocks contrasted sharply with the deep blue sky, but Emily's heart felt heavy. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself against the rising tide of anxiety. Okay, she muttered under her breath. You can do this. The canyon was eerily quiet, a stark difference from the bustling energy of the previous tour. She stepped closer to the edge, peering down into the depths, waiting for the echoes to rise up and greet her. I'm here, she called out, her voice trembling slightly. Show me what you have. Silence enveloped her, thick and oppressive. She felt a flicker of disappointment but pushed it aside. I'm ready, she said louder this time, her voice echoing back to her, clear and sharp. Then, as if summoned, the echoes began to return, but this time they were different. They didn't twist her laughter into something sinister. Instead, they morphed into whispers, soft and haunting. Emily, they breathed, her name reverberating against the canyon walls. You must remember. Her heart raced as she closed her eyes, allowing the echoes to wash over her. Memories flooded her mind, fragments of her childhood, moments of joy mixed with deep-seated regrets. She saw herself as a little girl, laughing freely, then the sharp pang of loss when her father had left. The echoes transformed into her own insecurities, the fears she had carried for so long. Stop, she yelled, her voice breaking the delicate spell. I don't want to feel this. But the echoes persisted, weaving through her thoughts, unraveling her defenses. Face us, they urged, the voices twisting into a chorus of her own doubts and fears. You cannot escape. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she sank to the ground, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions. I'm scared, she whispered, her vulnerability laid bare before the canyon. I don't know how to face it. You must embrace your truth, the echoes replied, their tone gentle yet insistent. Only then can you find freedom. As the echoes continued to resonate, Emily felt a shift within her. The weight of her past, once suffocating, began to lighten. She took a deep breath, allowing the pain to seep through her, releasing the pent-up anxiety she had clung to for so long. "I'm ready to let go," she finally said, her voice steady now, filled with a newfound determination. The echoes responded, swirling around her, becoming a soothing balm to her wounded spirit. "I will remember, and I will heal." The canyon seemed to sigh in agreement, the air growing lighter around her. Emily stood up, feeling a sense of clarity wash over her. She wouldn't abandon her career. She would return to the canyon, not just as a guide, but as a steward of its secrets. As she turned to leave, the echoes faded softly behind her, their whispers now a gentle reminder of the strength she had found. She knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but she was no longer afraid. The canyon had revealed its secrets to her, and in doing so, had set her free. The sun dipped low over the Rocky Mountain National Park, casting a warm golden hue across the rugged landscape. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the promise of autumn. Emily stood at the edge of the canyon, her heart pounding in her chest. It had been months since she had last set foot here, the memories of her previous experience still haunting her every step. Today, however, she was determined to confront her fears, to reclaim the life she had once loved as a tour guide. "Are you ready for this?" Jack's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. He stood beside her, his expression a mix of encouragement and concern. Despite the unease that lingered in Emily's mind, he had not given up on unraveling the mysteries of the canyon. He had become her steadfast companion, sharing in her fears and curiosities. Emily nodded, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. "I think so. She hesitated, glancing over the edge into the depths of the canyon, where shadows danced and sunlight struggled to penetrate. "I need to understand what happened back then. Why the echoes felt so malevolent." Jack stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure it out together. Just remember what we learned about the acoustics. They're just sounds, Emily. They can't hurt you." She took a deep breath, inhaling the cool air, trying to steady herself. "Right. Sounds. Just echoes." But as she spoke, the canyon seemed to respond, a faint whisper of her laughter drifting back to her, distorted and eerie. A shiver ran down her spine, but she forced herself to look away, focusing on the path ahead. Together, they ventured deeper into the canyon, the terrain rocky and uneven beneath their feet. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows that flickered like ghosts. As they walked, Emily felt the weight of her past pressing down on her, a reminder of the panic that had gripped her during her last tour, of the distorted echoes that had transformed her laughter into something sinister. "Do you think the legends are true?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but Emily could sense the underlying tension in his tone. "What legends?" she replied, trying to keep her fear at bay. "About the canyon echoing your fears, connecting to something deeper within you. The local historian mentioned it, right?" He glanced sideways at her, searching her face for answers. Emily shrugged, attempting to dismiss the notion. "It's just folklore. A way for people to explain the unexplainable. We know it's just geology." But as she spoke, doubt crept into her mind. What if there was more to it? What if the whispers of the canyon were tied to something far beyond mere acoustics? Silence enveloped them as they continued their trek, the sounds of their footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the canyon itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled. Emily stumbled, her heart racing as the earth shook violently. Jack caught her arm, steadying her as they both looked around in alarm. "What was that?" she gasped, adrenaline flooding her system. "I don't know," he shouted over the rumble of the earth. "We need to find shelter." Before they could react, the ground shook again, more violently this time. Cracks appeared in the rocky surface, and with a deafening roar, a section of the canyon wall gave way, revealing a dark crevice. The entrance of a hidden cave loomed before them, an invitation or perhaps a warning. "Should we go in?" Jack asked, his eyes wide with both fear and excitement. Emily hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to run. But curiosity gnawed her resolve. "We have to, don't we? We need to know what's inside." With a shared look of determination, they stepped into the cave. The air was cool and damp, the faint sound of dripping water echoing in the darkness. As they ventured deeper, the light from the entrance faded, and they were enveloped in shadows. Emily could feel the echoes of their footsteps bouncing off the walls, but this time, they felt different, charged with an energy that made her skin prickle. "Do you feel that?" Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's like the air is alive." "I do," Emily replied, her heart racing. "It's almost electric." As they moved further into the cave, Emily's senses heightened. The walls were adorned with ancient markings, symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly presence. She reached out to touch one, her fingers tracing the grooves carved by hands long gone. "What do you think it means?" Jack asked, his voice filled with awe. "I don't know," Emily admitted, her voice trembling. "But it feels significant." Suddenly, the echoes began to shift. Instead of merely repeating their footsteps, the sounds morphed into whispers, soft, haunting voices that seemed to swirl around them, weaving in and out of their consciousness. "Emily! Emily!" the echoes called, each repetition growing more distorted, more chilling. "Face your fears. What is happening?" Jack yelled, panic creeping into his tone. "This isn't normal." "I don't know," she shouted back, her own fear rising like a tide. "But we have to stay calm." But the whispers grew louder, filling the cave with an oppressive energy that threatened to overwhelm them. Emily pressed her hands against her ears, trying to block out the cacophony, but it seeped through, burrowing into her mind. "Emily, you are not enough. You will never be enough," the echoes taunted, each phrase laced with malice, twisting her insecurities into something monstrous. "Stop it," she screamed, her voice breaking. "This isn't real." But the echoes persisted, revealing her deepest regrets and fears, the moments of doubt that had plagued her life, the times she had felt inadequate, the memories of her failed relationships and lost dreams. Each echo was a reminder of her shortcomings, a reflection of the darkness she had tried so hard to escape. "Emily, you are destined to fail," the voices whispered, their tone mocking and cruel. "No," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I won't let you control me." Jack stepped closer, his presence a lifeline amidst the chaos. "Emily, listen to me. They're just echoes. They can't hurt you unless you let them." "Then what do I do?" she gasped, her voice breaking. "I can't face this." "Face it together," he urged, his voice steady despite the turmoil surrounding them. "You have to confront your fears. You can't run away from them. This canyon wants you to understand that." With his words echoing in her mind, Emily took a shaky breath, summoning every ounce of courage within her. She stepped forward, determined to confront the voices that had haunted her for so long. "I am more than my fears," she shouted, her voice ringing through the cave. "I refuse to be defined by them." As if in response, the echoes shifted again, the tones softening as the oppressive weight began to lift. "Emily. Emily. You are stronger than you know," the voices whispered, no longer mocking but filled with a strange resonance of understanding. A brilliant light erupted from the cave walls, illuminating the ancient markings with a warm glow. Emily's heart raced as she realized the truth. These echoes were not merely reflections of her fears. They were a call to confront her true self, to embrace her strengths and weaknesses alike. In that moment, the canyon transformed from a place of dread into a sanctuary of healing. The whispers became a symphony of acceptance, urging her to let go of the burdens she had carried for too long. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for showing me." Jack stood beside her, awestruck as the echoes morphed into something beautiful, a melody that resonated through the cave, wrapping around them like a warm embrace. "You did it, Emily. You faced them." "I did," she replied, a smile breaking through the tears streaming down her face. "I finally understand. The echoes were never meant to scare me. They were a part of me, calling me back to this place." As they stepped back into the light of the canyon, Emily felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The sun illuminated the landscape, casting away the shadows that had loomed over her for so long. The echoes that had once haunted her now felt like a gentle reminder of her journey, a journey that had led her back to the canyon, not as a frightened tour guide, but as its guardian. "Are you ready to share your story?" Jack asked, a grin spreading across his face. Emily took a deep breath, her heart swelled with newfound confidence. "More than ready. This canyon has secrets, and I'm meant to be its guide." Together, they stood at the edge of the canyon, the whispers of the past now a harmonious echo of hope, ready to embrace whatever came next. In the heart of the Coconino National Forest, the early morning sun cast a golden hue over the towering pines and the rolling hills, transforming the landscape into a breathtaking tableau. Alex stood at the edge of a clearing, his heart racing with excitement as he prepared his camera for the day's adventure. He was an amateur photographer, not yet seasoned enough to call himself a professional, but the passion he felt for capturing the beauty of nature was undeniable. The forest, with its rich colors and tranquil atmosphere, promised the perfect backdrop for his exploration. As he adjusted the settings on his camera, Alex took a moment to breathe in the fresh, crisp air. It was a welcome contrast to the bustling city he had left behind, a place filled with noise and chaos. Here, in the embrace of nature, he felt at peace. He was alone, but the solitude was comforting, a chance for him to immerse himself in his craft without distractions. "Today is going to be incredible," he muttered to himself, a smile spreading across his face. With a practiced hand, he raised his camera to his eye and focused on a cluster of wildflowers swaying gently in the morning breeze. The sunlight filtered through the leaves above, creating a play of light and shadow that danced across the ground. He pressed the shutter, capturing the moment, and felt a surge of satisfaction as the click of the camera echoed in the stillness. "Perfect," he whispered, reviewing the image on the digital display. The colors were vibrant, the composition just as he had envisioned. Encouraged by his success, Alex wandered deeper into the forest, his camera ready to seize every opportunity that presented itself. The trees towered above him, their trunks thick and sturdy, their branches forming a protective canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft beams. He felt like an explorer in a new world, discovering hidden treasures at every turn. He snapped pictures of ancient trees with gnarled roots, the way the light fell on the forest floor, and the distant mountains that loomed like guardians at the edge of the horizon. As he continued to capture the beauty around him, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He turned, instinctively raising the camera, but there was nothing there, only the gentle sway of branches and the rustle of leaves. Just a trick of the light, he assured himself, shaking off the unease that tugged at the back of his mind. Nature had a way of playing with perceptions, and he was determined not to let his imagination run wild. He took another picture, this time of the vibrant green ferns that carpeted the ground, and felt reassured by the normalcy of his surroundings. But as Alex reviewed the shots on his camera, a chill crept down his spine. In every photograph he had taken, a shadow lingered in the corner of the frame. It was subtle at first, almost indistinguishable, but as he scrolled through the images, it became more pronounced. The figure was dark and indistinct, a mere silhouette that seemed to loom just outside the edges of his vision. His heart raced as he tried to rationalize what he was seeing. It must be a flaw in the lens, he reasoned, but the more he examined the photos, the more he felt an inexplicable dread seep into his bones. "Come on, it's just a shadow," Alex muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's probably just a branch or something." But deep down, he felt a rising sense of unease. He glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking behind the trees, but the forest remained still and silent. The peaceful retreat he had envisioned now felt heavy with an unseen presence. With a shaky breath, he forced himself to move on, trying to shake the feeling that he was being watched. He focused on the sights around him, the way the sunlight danced through the leaves and the gentle sounds of nature that filled the air. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, his thoughts kept drifting back to the shadow in his photographs. It was as if it were taunting him, challenging him to look closer, to understand what it was. After a while, Alex found a small stream trickling through the underbrush, its water sparkling in the sunlight. He paused, captivated by the way the light reflected off the surface, creating a dazzling display of colors. Setting up his camera on a nearby rock, he framed the shot, feeling a flicker of excitement return. "This will be amazing," he said to himself, and pressed the shutter once more. But as he reviewed this new image, his breath hitched in his throat. The shadow was there again, darker and more defined, hovering just behind the water's edge. Panic surged through him as he fought to maintain his composure. "This isn't happening," he said, his voice trembling. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the figure standing there, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Get a grip, Alex," he chastised himself, shaking his head. "It's just a glitch. It has to be." But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. An oppressive weight settled in his chest, and he felt the urge to flee, to escape the suffocating atmosphere that surrounded him. He was still in the heart of the forest, but it no longer felt welcoming. It felt like a trap. Determined not to let fear dictate his actions, Alex packed his camera away and began to make his way back to the trailhead. Each step felt heavier than the last, and an unsettling thought gnawed at his mind. What if he wasn't alone? What if the shadow was more than just a defect in his camera? The question spiraled, feeding into a growing sense of dread. As he walked, the forest seemed to close in around him, the trees standing taller and the shadows darker. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig sent his heart racing. "It's just the wind," he muttered, though the words did little to soothe his fraying nerves. He glanced back at the path he had traveled, expecting to see something behind him, but there was only silence. When he finally reached the clearing where he had started, The golden light of the sun had shifted to a more muted tone, casting elongated shadows across the ground. It was still beautiful, yet the eerie sensation lingered, wrapping around him like a shroud. He set his camera down on a nearby log, his hands trembling slightly as he reviewed the photos once more. The shadow was persistent, a dark specter that haunted each image, and he felt a wave of nausea wash over him. "What is going on?" Alex breathed, his voice shaking with disbelief. He felt as if he were losing his grip on reality, the line between the natural world and the supernatural blurring in a way that left him feeling vulnerable and exposed. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a welcome distraction from the spiraling thoughts. He pulled it out, grateful for the chance to connect with someone, anyone, outside of this unsettling experience. It was a message from his friend, Jake. "Hey, man. How's the trip going? Catch any good shots?" Alex hesitated for a moment, staring at the screen. Should he tell Jake about the shadow? Would he believe him? Instead, he opted for a safer reply. "It's great. Just getting some good shots. I'll send some later." "Awesome. Can't wait to see them. Just remember to stay safe out there." The message brought a small smile to Alex's face, but the warmth was short-lived. The weight of the forest pressed down on him again, and he felt the chill of reality sink in. He was alone in a vast wilderness, and there were things in the shadows, things he couldn't explain. With resolve, he decided to head back to his car. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, and the forest was beginning to darken. As he walked, the sounds of nature faded into an eerie silence, each step echoing in the stillness. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed, that the shadow was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. "Just keep moving," he urged himself, his breath quickening. "You'll be fine." But his words felt hollow, and with each passing moment, the sense of dread only deepened. When he finally reached his car, he threw open the door and climbed inside, slamming it shut behind him as if to seal out the creeping anxiety. He took a moment to collect himself, resting his forehead against the steering wheel. "It's just a shadow," he whispered, trying to convince himself. "Just a trick of the light." But as he drove away from the forest, the images of the shadow lingered in his mind, haunting him with every mile he put between himself and the dark woods. He had come seeking beauty, a connection with nature, but instead, he had stumbled into a mystery that left him shaken. The thrill of photography had turned into a chilling encounter with the unknown, and as he navigated the winding road, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had awakened something in the forest, something that would not rest until it was confronted. He glanced into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the shadow peering back at him, but there was nothing, only the fading light of day retreating behind the mountains. Yet the shadow lingered in his mind, a dark omen that hinted at the trials yet to come. The sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows through the towering pines of Coconino National Forest. Alex stumbled through the underbrush, his heart racing as he glanced over his shoulder, convinced that the ominous presence from his photographs was now chasing him. Each rustle of leaves and snap of twigs underfoot amplified his anxiety, pushing him to run faster, as if fleeing a nightmare that had leaped out of his camera and into reality. "Just keep moving," he muttered under his breath, the words barely audible over the thudding of his heart. "It can't catch you if you don't stop." His mind replayed the images he had seen earlier, the shadow that loomed behind him in every shot, a dark figure that seemed to mock his passion for photography. Initially, Alex had brushed it off, attributing it to a trick of the light or a smudge on the lens. But now, As he raced deeper into the woods, the fear was palpable, a living thing that clawed at his sanity. The trees around him grew denser, their trunks twisting upwards like gnarled fingers reaching for the sky. He barely noticed the way the sunlight began to fade, replaced by the eerie twilight that enveloped the forest. The tranquility of nature had morphed into an unsettling silence that pressed against him, and the shadows deepened, stretching like dark tendrils eager to grasp him. Suddenly, Alex burst into a clearing, a space where the trees seemed to bend away as if repelled by some unseen force. It was an uncanny sight, and he felt an overwhelming urge to back away, to escape the oppressive atmosphere that enveloped him. He stood frozen for a moment, breathing heavily, trying to shake off the sense of dread that seeped into his bones. "Okay, this is ridiculous," he said aloud, attempting to convince himself that it was just his imagination. "You're just a photographer in a forest. Nothing is chasing you." But his mind was a battlefield, filled with images of the shadowy figure haunting his memories. He could almost feel its breath on his neck, the chill that accompanied it creeping down his spine. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus on the beauty of the clearing, the way the last rays of sunlight painted the ground in hues of gold and orange, the gentle rustle of leaves in the cool breeze. Yet, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced along the ground, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He turned abruptly, scanning the tree line, half expecting to see that menacing silhouette lurking just beyond his vision. "Get a grip, Alex," he whispered, shaking his head as if to dislodge the thoughts that clung to him. "It's just a shadow. Just a glitch in the camera." He took out his camera, his hands trembling slightly as he aimed it at the clearing. Despite the fear gnawing at him, the photographer in him yearned to capture the serene beauty of the moment. But as he clicked the shutter, he was struck by an overwhelming sense of wrongness, as if the very air was charged with a malevolent energy. "Let's just get out of here," he mumbled, lowering the camera and taking a step back. He needed to find a way home, away from this haunted place. He turned, ready to retrace his steps, when a voice broke the silence, startling him. "Hey, you lost?" Alex whipped around to find a man in a forest ranger uniform stepping into the clearing. The ranger was tall, with sun-kissed skin and a friendly demeanor, but Alex's heart raced at the unexpected encounter. He was relieved to see another person, yet the urgency of his situation intensified. I'm fine," Alex stammered, his voice shaky. "Just out for a walk, but I think I'm ready to head back." The ranger raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Everything all right?" Alex hesitated, weighing whether to share his fears or brush them off as mere paranoia. "I think I saw something, in my photographs. A shadow. It's been following me." The ranger chuckled softly, a sound that echoed oddly in the stillness of the woods. "You know how it is out here. Your mind plays tricks on you. It's easy to get spooked in the woods, especially when you're alone. But it's in every photo," Alex insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "I swear, it's like something's there, lurking." "Probably just a glitch in your camera," the ranger replied, shrugging it off. "Or maybe you're just tired from hiking. Why don't you take a break? Sit down for a minute. You'll feel better." Alex looked at him, a mixture of frustration and fear bubbling inside. "No, you don't understand. I felt it. I felt like something was watching me. Like I wasn't alone." The ranger's expression softened, and he nodded slowly. "Look, I get it. The woods can be disorienting, but you're safe here with me. I'll walk you back to the trailhead. Let's get you some fresh air and a cold drink." Reluctantly, Alex agreed, the comfort of companionship outweighing his unease. As they walked, the ranger chatted about the forest, sharing stories of the wildlife and the beauty of the changing seasons. But Alex found it hard to focus. His mind was still clouded with images of that dark figure. "Have you ever seen anything strange out here?" Alex ventured, glancing at the ranger. "Strange? Like what?" he asked, a bemused smile on his face. "Like shadows that shouldn't be there. Or things moving in the corner of your eye." The ranger laughed, shaking his head. "Just the usual. You know, bears, mountain lions, the occasional ghost story. But nothing to worry about. Just people having fun with their imaginations." Alex remained silent, his thoughts swirling. It was comforting to hear the ranger dismiss his fears, but a part of him couldn't let it go. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was indeed out there, waiting, watching. As they approached the trailhead, the last light of day began to fade, and a chill crept into the air. The ranger turned to him, a reassuring smile on his face. "You'll be all right, Alex. Just remember, the forest is like a friend. Sometimes it can be a little eerie, but it always has your back." "Thanks," Alex replied, forcing a smile. "I appreciate it." They parted ways, and as Alex stepped onto the familiar path, the weight of the forest seemed to lift slightly. Yet, as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to him. The photographs, the shadow, they were still fresh in his mind, and he knew he couldn't ignore them forever. As he reached his car, the sun disappeared completely, plunging the forest into darkness. Alex fumbled with his keys, his fingers trembling as he unlocked the door. He slipped into the driver's seat, the comforting hum of the engine a brief respite from the encroaching dread. He couldn't go home without understanding what had happened. He needed to confront the shadow in his photos, to unravel the mystery that had entwined itself around his passion. But as he drove away from the forest, a heavy sense of foreboding settled in his chest. "Why did I come here?" he whispered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "What have I gotten myself into?" The lonely road stretched ahead, illuminated only by his headlights, but the darkness of the forest loomed in the rearview mirror, a silent reminder of the secrets held within its depths. In the dim light of his cramped apartment, cluttered with camera gear and stacks of nature magazines, Alex sat hunched over his laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating his weary face. Days had passed since his ill-fated trip to Coconino National Forest, yet the images he had captured continued to haunt him. Each photograph revealed a sinister shadow that seemed to mock his every attempt to understand its presence. Shaking his head in disbelief, he clicked through the images again, desperate to find some semblance of logic in the chaos. "What are you?" he muttered under his breath, frustration rife in his tone. His mind raced, recalling the eerie feeling of being watched, the sensation of breath on the back of his neck as he had fled through the trees. The shadow had been there, lurking, always just out of focus, taunting him with its inscrutable nature. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his disheveled hair. The stories he had read about the forest echoed in his mind, tales of lost souls and restless spirits wandering through the trees. He had dismissed them initially, attributing them to the overactive imaginations of those who had come before him. But now, with every click of the shutter, he felt a deepening connection to those legends, a sense that perhaps there was something more to the tales than mere folklore. As he leaned forward again, a sudden burst of determination surged through him. He needed answers. He needed to confront this shadow, to uncover its secrets and dispel the fear that had taken root in his heart. With renewed vigor, he began searching online for any information he could find about the forest. Hours slipped by as he scoured forums, reading the accounts of fellow adventurers and paranormal enthusiasts. His eyes widened as he stumbled upon a thread titled "Ghostly Figures in Coconino." The posts were filled with chilling testimonies from hikers who had encountered strange phenomena, whispers in the wind, eerie flickers of light, and, most alarmingly, shadowy figures that seemed to follow them through the trees. One user wrote, "I swear, I felt something watching me. I turned around, and there it was, a silhouette just beyond the brush, but when I approached, it was gone." Alex's heart raced as he read through the comments. The experiences echoed his own, each story a thread weaving a tapestry of fear and fascination. He jotted down notes, piecing together a narrative that made sense of his own encounter. With each revelation, the shadows grew longer, and he felt a pull to return to the very place that had ignited his obsession. He glanced at the clock, realizing it was well past midnight. The thought of sleep was distant. His mind was a whirlwind, spinning tales of the unknown that beckoned him back to the forest. After a moment of hesitation, he made a decision. He would return to the Coconino National Forest, armed not only with his camera but with the knowledge he had gathered. This time, he would confront the fear head-on. The next morning, he prepared for his journey with a sense of purpose. He packed his camera gear meticulously, ensuring everything was in order. The new lens he had purchased gleamed with promise, and he felt a flicker of excitement amidst his trepidation. He filled his backpack with essential supplies: water, snacks, a flashlight, and a notebook to document his findings. As he zipped up the bag, he could almost hear the whispers of the forest calling him back. The drive to the forest was filled with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The winding roads, flanked by towering pines and rugged terrain, felt familiar yet foreign. As he parked his car at the entrance, he took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp, pine-scented air. The forest felt alive, the rustle of the leaves and the distant chirping of birds creating a symphony that both soothed and unsettled him. With his camera slung over his shoulder, Alex set off along the trail, determined to retrace his steps. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ground as he walked deeper into the woods. Each snap of the shutter was a reminder of his purpose, a way to reclaim the joy that photography had once brought him. After hours of hiking, he found himself in a clearing where he had stumbled upon the shadowy figure before. The atmosphere felt thick, charged with an energy that sent shivers down his spine. He set up his camera on a tripod, framing the shot as he prepared to capture the essence of the place that had haunted him. "Okay, let's see what you've got," he muttered to himself, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. He pressed the shutter button, and the camera clicked, the sound echoing in the stillness. He moved around the clearing, taking shots from different angles, each click an attempt to exorcise the fear that had clung to him since that fateful day. As he reviewed the images on the camera's display, his heart sank. The shadow was still there, lurking just at the edge of the frame, an ever-present reminder of his dread. "Come on," he groaned, running a hand through his hair. "This can't be happening again." Determined not to let the shadow win, he continued to take more photos, pushing through the unease that threatened to overwhelm him. Hours passed as he immersed himself in the beauty of the forest, focusing on the intricate details of the flora and fauna around him. He captured the vibrant wildflowers swaying in the breeze, the the sunlight dancing on the surface of a nearby stream, and the majestic trees towering above, each image a testament to the beauty he sought to uncover. But in the back of his mind, the shadow remained, an ever-looming specter. He could feel it, lurking just beyond his vision, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, an unsettling chill crept into the air. Maybe I should head back, he thought, glancing at his watch. It was getting late, and the thought of navigating the forest in darkness sent a wave of anxiety through him. Yet, a part of him resisted. He was so close to understanding, to unraveling the mystery that had consumed him. With a deep breath, Alex decided to stay a little longer. He set up his camera to capture the sunset, the vibrant oranges and pinks bleeding into the sky. As he adjusted the settings, he felt a sudden gust of wind whip through the clearing, rustling the leaves violently and sending a chill racing down his spine. "Is anyone there?" he called out, his voice trembling slightly. The only response was the rustle of the trees, a sound that felt almost mocking. He shook his head, dismissing his rising paranoia. "It's just the wind," he reassured himself, though the unease lingered. As darkness descended, the forest transformed. The familiar pathways became shadowy corridors, and the sounds of nature morphed into an unsettling symphony of creaks and whispers. Alex's heart raced as he adjusted the camera for low-light conditions, each click echoing in the silence. A part of him wanted to flee, to escape the growing sense of dread that enveloped him like a shroud. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of movement. His breath caught in his throat as he turned, pointing the camera instinctively in the direction of the disturbance. The lens focused on the shadows, but there was nothing, just the trees standing silently, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. "Get a grip, Alex," he muttered, forcing himself to breathe. "It's just your imagination." But the words felt hollow, echoing in the vast emptiness around him. He shook his head, trying to dispel the fear that clung to him like a shadow of its own. With renewed determination, he pressed on, moving deeper into the woods. The path twisted and turned, and with each step, he felt the weight of the unknown pressing down upon him. He paused to take a breath, glancing around as the shadows lengthened, a dark curtain falling over the forest. "Maybe I should have brought a buddy," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. The thought of returning to his car crossed his mind, but he brushed it aside. He was here to confront the shadow, to reclaim his passion for photography. As he continued, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The forest held its breath, and every rustle of leaves sent his heart racing. He stopped again, scanning the area. "Hello," he called out, his voice trembling slightly. Silence enveloped him, thick and suffocating. Just as he began to feel the weight of despair creeping in, he caught sight of something, a flicker of movement just beyond the trees. His heart raced as he turned the camera toward it, adrenaline surging through his veins. "Show yourself," he shouted, his voice firm, though his insides churned with fear. But as quickly as it had appeared, the movement vanished into the shadows. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, the thrill of fear mingling with an inexplicable curiosity. He took a deep breath, willing himself to step closer to where he had seen the flicker. "Maybe it's just a deer or something," he reassured himself, though doubt lingered in the back of his mind. He approached cautiously, the ground crunching beneath his feet. The trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows that danced in the fading light. He raised the camera again, ready to capture whatever lay ahead, hoping for clarity amidst the chaos. In that moment, As the last rays of sunlight slipped away, the sun hung high in the sky, casting a relentless glare over the Coconino National Forest. Alex stood at the edge of a winding path, the weight of his new camera slung comfortably over his shoulder. Today was meant to be a fresh start, a chance to reclaim his passion for photography after the unsettling events that had shadowed his recent outings. The crisp air of the forest was invigorating, and the way the sunlight filtered through the ancient pines gave him hope that beauty still awaited him among the trees. With determination, he pressed the shutter button, capturing the vibrant greens and browns of the forest. Each click echoed in the stillness, a reminder of why he loved this place. Yet, beneath the surface of his enthusiasm, a flicker of anxiety lingered, an unwelcome companion since the shadow first revealed itself in his photos. Alex pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the immediate beauty around him. As he ventured deeper into the woods, the sounds of rustling leaves and distant bird calls enveloped him. He paused occasionally, framing shots of sun-drenched ferns and towering trees, but each time he raised his camera, a nagging sensation crept in. It was as if the very forest were holding its breath, waiting. He shook his head, willing himself to concentrate. "Just take the pictures, Alex. That's all you need to do," he muttered to himself, forcing a smile as he angled for another shot of a sunbeam piercing through the canopy. But as he clicked the shutter, something caught his eye, a flicker of dark movement darting between the trees. His heart raced, and instinctively, he spun around, camera ready, but the forest was empty. Just trees swaying gently in the breeze. "Get a grip," he whispered, stepping back onto the path. "It's just your imagination." But doubts gnawed at him. Was it truly his imagination, or was something lurking just beyond his sight? He tried to shake off the unease, but the silence felt heavy, as if the trees themselves were watching. His feet carried him forward, though his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He needed to confront this fear, he reminded himself. He had come here to find beauty, not to be haunted by shadows. After walking for a while, he noticed the trail beginning to narrow, the trees closing in around him. The vibrant sounds of nature began to fade, replaced by an eerie stillness. He paused, feeling a shiver run down his spine. The air was thick, charged with something he couldn't quite name. He turned, half expecting to see the shadow from his previous photos lurking just out of sight. Instead, he was met with silence and a rustling sound that seemed to be coming from behind him. "Hello," he called out, the word echoing through the trees. His voice felt small, swallowed by the vastness of the forest. "Is anyone there?" When no response came, he shook his head, scolding himself for letting his imagination run wild. He lifted his camera again, attempting to capture the beauty of the moment, but the image felt marred by his lingering dread. Then, as he adjusted the focus, he noticed something odd, a footprint, large and unmistakable, leading away from the path. His heart pounded as he knelt to examine the print, the outline deep and fresh in the soft earth. It looked almost human, but was far too large. He glanced around, aware that he was alone, yet the sensation of being watched intensified. Was someone else in the forest with him? The thought sent a chill through him. "Okay, Alex, you're just overthinking again," he mumbled, trying to convince himself as he stood up. But as he scanned the surroundings, he felt an unsettling presence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He hesitated, weighing his options. He could continue deeper into the woods, or he could turn back. But turning back felt like a concession to his fears, and he wasn't ready to let the shadow dictate his actions. Instead, he decided to follow the footprints, curiosity overriding his trepidation. With each step, the forest grew denser, shadows stretching long across the ground. The sound of his footsteps was muffled by the thick layer of pine needles, and for a moment, he felt like a ghost in this otherworldly place. As he moved further along the trail, he caught another glimpse of movement, this time more pronounced, a dark figure darting behind a tree. Panic surged through him, and he raised his camera instinctively, heart racing. "Who's there?" he shouted, voice trembling. The question hung in the air, unanswered. The moment felt suspended, the forest holding its breath once again. He made a decision in that instant, to confront the shadow. He wasn't just an observer, he was a participant in this unfolding mystery. With renewed resolve, he pushed forward, camera at the ready, driven by an urge to capture whatever it was that had haunted him. But the deeper he went, the more disoriented he became. The trees loomed larger, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers against the sky. He felt the weight of the silence pressing down on him, and the air turned thick and suffocating. Suddenly, he heard it, a low rustle, a whisper of movement that set his instincts on high alert. He whirled around, heart pounding, and snapped a photo, the flash illuminating a small clearing. At first, all he saw were trees, but then he noticed it, a fleeting shadow darting from one trunk to another. "Show yourself," he yelled, a mix of anger and fear rising within him. He stepped forward, determined to confront whatever it was that had invaded his thoughts. The camera felt heavy in his hands, an anchor to reality in this surreal moment. But as he moved closer, the shadow vanished, leaving only the quiet murmur of the forest behind. Alex's breath quickened, doubt creeping back in. What was he chasing? Was it real, or just a figment of his imagination? He looked down at the ground, where the footprints continued, urging him on. He followed them until he reached a small clearing, the sunlight breaking through the treetops and illuminating the space in an ethereal glow. It was beautiful, but there was an underlying sense of foreboding. He set up his camera, hoping to capture the serenity of the moment, but the shadow lingered in the back of his mind, taunting him. "Maybe it's just the heat," he whispered to himself, trying to rationalize his fear. "It's all in your head." But even as he spoke the words, the skepticism lingered. He reviewed the images he had taken so far, scrolling through the photos with a growing sense of dread. Each shot revealed the same dark figure lurking in the corners, a ghastly specter haunting his every frame. The realization sent a shiver down his spine, and he fought the urge to scream. "Why are you doing this?" he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" The forest remained silent, the only response the rustling of leaves in the wind. It felt as if the very trees were listening, waiting for him to make his next move. He stood in the clearing, the weight of the camera bearing down on him, and for a moment, he felt utterly alone in a world of shadows. It was then that his instincts kicked in, a primal urge to flee rising within him. The fear that had been simmering beneath the surface surged forward, urging him to turn back. But just as he began to retreat, he noticed something, a glimmer of light on the forest floor, drawing his attention. He knelt down, curiosity piqued. Amidst the leaves, a small, weathered object lay half buried. He brushed away the dirt, revealing a tarnished locket, its surface intricately engraved. A chill ran through him as he picked it up, the cold metal sending a shudder through his fingers. "What are you doing here?" he murmured to the locket, the words slipping from his lips unbidden. He opened it slowly, heart racing, and found a faded photograph inside. The image was worn, but he could make out the features of a young woman, her eyes gazing back at him with an intensity that sent a wave of unease through him. "Is this yours?" he asked, feeling foolish as he spoke to the empty forest. "Are you the one I've been seeing?" As if in response, the air shifted. A sudden chill swept through the clearing, and Alex felt a prickle of fear at the base of his neck. He stood up abruptly, the locket clutched tightly in his hand. The shadow he had been chasing felt closer than ever, the sense of being watched overwhelming. A voice echoed in his mind, a whisper he couldn't quite make out, but it felt urgent, desperate. "Help me," it seemed to say, a plea that reverberated through the air. Alex's heart raced as he turned, scanning the surrounding trees, searching for the source of the voice. "Who's there?" he called, his voice trembling. "What do you want?" But the forest remained silent, the only sound the rustling of leaves, mocking his fear. The locket felt heavy in his hand, a weight that pulled him deeper into the mystery. "Okay," he whispered, trying to steady his breath. "I'll find out what's going on. I won't let you down." With that resolve, he took a step forward, the locket still clutched tightly. The path ahead was shrouded in shadows, but he felt the moon hung high above the Coconino National Forest, casting an ethereal glow that made the landscape both beautiful and haunting. Alex stood beside his car, nervously checking the equipment he had brought for the night. The shadows of the towering pines stretched ominously, and he felt a chill creep down his spine. It was one thing to be frightened alone, it was another to be accompanied by someone who shared that fear with him. He glanced over at Sarah, the local paranormal investigator he had contacted after his harrowing experiences in the forest. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but laced with an edge of excitement. Her dark hair hung loosely over her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled with a mix of determination and curiosity. "I think so," Alex replied, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. "But I'm not sure what we'll find out here. The last time I was in these woods," he trailed off, the memories of the shadowy figure flooding back, making his heart race. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together," she reassured him, checking her own gear, a collection of cameras, audio recorders, and various gadgets that promised to capture the supernatural. As they made their way deeper into the forest, the atmosphere thickened with an unsettling silence, broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. The path was almost unrecognizable in the dim light, yet Sarah moved with confidence, leading them to a clearing that Alex had stumbled upon during his previous visit. The trees here appeared to whisper secrets, their gnarled branches reaching out like fingers. "Let's set up here," Sarah suggested, her voice a whisper as if speaking too loudly would disturb the spirits that might dwell nearby. Alex nodded, feeling a mixture of anticipation and dread. They began to set up the equipment, placing cameras strategically around the perimeter of the clearing. Sarah was meticulous, checking angles and ensuring that each camera was positioned perfectly to capture any unexpected movement. "Do you really think we'll see anything?" Alex asked, skepticism creeping into his tone. "Many people have reported strange occurrences here," Sarah replied, her focus unwavering. "It's not just you. This place has a history of paranormal activity. You're not alone in your experience." "Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's real," he countered, trying to convince himself as much as her. "What if it's just my camera? The ranger said it could be a defect. Or maybe it's something more," she said, her eyes narrowing as she finished adjusting a camera. "Tonight, we'll find out." As darkness descended, the forest transformed. The trees loomed larger, their shadows deepening, and an eerie stillness enveloped them. The air felt charged, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. "Do you hear that?" Sarah suddenly asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex strained to listen, his heart pounding in his chest. A low rustling echoed through the trees, followed by a distant snap of a twig. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "It's probably just an animal," he offered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Sarah conceded, but the look in her eyes suggested she wasn't convinced. "Let's get the cameras rolling." They settled down near a makeshift camp, surrounded by the equipment. The flickering light from a small lantern illuminated their faces, casting strange shadows that danced across the ground. Sarah began recording their thoughts, her voice calm and controlled. "Tonight, we're investigating reports of paranormal activity in Coconino National Forest. Alex has experienced something inexplicable, an elusive shadow figure that has haunted his photography. We're here to uncover the truth." Alex felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he listened to her words. He was no longer just a photographer, he had become a subject of a paranormal investigation, and the weight of that role was heavy. "Let's give it some time," Sarah said, shutting off the recorder. "We'll review the footage periodically, but for now, let's just sit and observe." Minutes turned into hours as they sat in silence, the forest around them alive with unseen creatures. The night air grew colder, and Alex wrapped his arms around himself, wishing he had brought a heavier jacket. "What do you think it is?" he finally asked, breaking the oppressive silence. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her brow furrowed in thought. "Could be a spirit, a lost soul, or maybe something more sinister. People have been known to disappear in these woods." "Disappearing sounds ominous," Alex said, forcing a chuckle to lighten the mood. "Just a fact," she countered, her expression serious. "But remember, fear can manifest in different ways. It's essential to keep an open mind." Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the trees behind them, and both of them jumped, hearts racing. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked, his voice strained. "Yeah," Sarah replied, her eyes darting toward the sound. It sounded close. They both turned to face the darkness, the flickering light of the lantern casting long shadows that seemed to reach out toward them. "Let's check the cameras," Sarah suggested, standing up with a sense of urgency. They moved to the nearest recording device, a small camcorder perched on a tripod. Sarah pressed play, and they watched the footage together, tension building between them. The screen flickered with the images of the clearing, the trees swaying gently in the night breeze. "Nothing so far," Alex said, disappointment creeping in. "Let's try another," Sarah urged, moving to the next camera position deeper in the clearing. As they reviewed more footage, the sense of anticipation shifted to unease. The sounds of the forest grew louder, and the feeling of being watched intensified. Shadows seemed to dance just beyond the reach of the camera's light, and every rustle in the underbrush sent their adrenaline surging. "Let's not let our imaginations run wild," Alex said, trying to steady his nerves. "It could be just the wind, you know?" "Right," Sarah replied, though her eyes were still scanning the darkness. "But we should remain cautious. The forest has its own rules." Time slipped away, and the atmosphere thickened with an unspeakable tension. The distant sounds morphed into something more sinister, echoing through the trees like whispers of the past. "Do you think?" Alex started, but he couldn't finish the thought. He didn't want to voice his fears, fearing it would give them power. "Let's step out for a moment," Sarah suggested. "I need some fresh air." They stepped outside the bubble of light created by the lantern, and the night enveloped them. The moonlight filtered through the trees, creating a surreal glow that made the forest look almost magical. Yet, the beauty was deceptive, and Alex felt the weight of the shadows pressing in around them. "Sarah," he called, glancing around. "Do you think we should go back?" "Just a few more minutes," she urged, her voice steady. "We've come this far. Let's see what happens." With a reluctant nod, Alex forced himself to stay. They returned to the clearing, but as they did, a strange sensation washed over him. It was as if the very air was charged with electricity, and the forest seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. "Did you feel that?" Alex asked, glancing at Sarah. "Yeah," she replied, her expression growing serious. "It's definitely more intense now." Suddenly, a low growl emanated from the darkness, reverberating through the trees. It was a sound that sent chills racing down Alex's spine, and he felt his heart drop into his stomach. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Stay close," Sarah instructed, her eyes scanning the darkness. They moved back to the lantern's light, but the unease lingered like a shadow, clawing at their minds. They continued to monitor the cameras, and as the night wore on, strange noises echoed through the trees. The rustling grew louder, accompanied by the sound of footsteps, too heavy to be an animal. The air was thick with tension, and every sound became amplified in the silence of the night. "Let's review the last camera footage one more time," Sarah suggested, her voice strained. They gathered around the screen, and as the footage played, Alex felt a knot form in his stomach. The familiar dark shape appeared in the corner of the frame, lurking just beyond the trees, almost as if it were watching them. "Do you see that?" he pointed, his heart racing. Sarah nodded, her face pale. "This is exactly what others have described." "It's not just you, Alex." "But what is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But it's definitely something we need to investigate further." Just then, the lantern flickered violently, casting erratic shadows and plunging them into darkness. "Sarah!" Alex shouted, panic gripping him. "Stay calm," she replied, but her voice was strained. The shadows around them seemed to pulse, and Alex felt a presence drawing closer. "We need to get out of here," he urged, backing away. But before they could make a move, a cold breeze swept through the clearing, chilling them to the bone. The sound of whispers filled the air, and Alex felt an overwhelming sense of dread. "Something is not right," Sarah said, her eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, the cameras as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the thick underbrush of Coconino National Forest. Alex sat beside the flickering campfire, his heart racing with a mix of dread and anticipation. The fire crackled, sending up sparks that danced in the cool evening air. Sarah, the local paranormal investigator he had enlisted for help, was hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating her focused expression. They had spent the last few hours setting up cameras around their camp. The eerie stillness of the forest felt palpable, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Do you think we'll catch anything?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might provoke whatever was lurking in the shadows. Sarah looked up, her brow furrowed. "If the stories are true, we should see something tonight. The forest has a history of strange occurrences, especially under the full moon," she replied, her tone a mix of enthusiasm and caution. "Just remember, not everything we see is what it seems." Alex nodded, his mind racing back to the countless hours he had spent poring over his photographs, analyzing every detail of the shadowy figure that had haunted him. He had wanted to believe in the supernatural, to feel like he was part of something bigger than himself. But as he sat there, the weight of Sarah's presence and the reality of their situation settled heavily on his shoulders. After a while, Sarah paused her editing, her gaze drifting to the darkness beyond the firelight. "Let's review the footage from earlier today," she suggested, a hint of excitement creeping into her voice. "If we caught anything, it will definitely be on there." Alex's stomach nodded as they turned their attention to the screen. Sarah clicked through the footage, fast-forwarding past the mundane moments of their setup. The flickering images revealed their earlier attempts at capturing the essence of the forest, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Alex felt a swell of hope. Perhaps tonight would yield nothing at all. Then Sarah hit pause, her finger hovering over the play button. "Wait, go back a few seconds," she instructed, her voice suddenly urgent. They rewound the video, and there it was, a dark shape moving just beyond the trees, almost gliding rather than walking. Alex's breath caught in his throat. "Did you see that?" he exclaimed, a mixture of fear and thrill coursing through him. Sarah leaned closer, her eyes widening. "This is incredible," she breathed. "We need to analyze it frame by frame." As they dissected the footage, Alex's excitement began to turn to dread. "What if that's not just a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination?" he murmured, his voice trembling. "What if it's real?" "Alex, you're here to face your fears, remember?" Sarah said gently, her tone attempting to soothe his rising panic. "We'll figure this out together." Yet, as Sarah resumed her focus on the video, Alex's unease grew. Something in her demeanor had shifted. There was an intensity in her gaze that he hadn't noticed before, a spark of something that felt off. He watched her work, the rhythm of her fingers on the keyboard, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something darker than he had anticipated. "Let's take a break before we dive deeper into this," Alex suggested, attempting to regain some composure. "Maybe we can make some coffee?" "Sure," Sarah replied, her eyes still glued to the screen. "Just give me a minute." As Alex moved around the camp, gathering the supplies for coffee, he couldn't help but glance back at Sarah, who was now muttering to herself, her brow furrowed in concentration. The flickering firelight cast strange shadows across her face, and the air felt thick with tension. He poured the water into a small pot and set it over the flames, the bubbling liquid providing a momentary distraction. "Sarah," he called over his shoulder, attempting to lighten the mood. "What do you think it will taste like? Ghostly brew?" She didn't respond, her focus unwavering. A knot formed in Alex's stomach, an instinct that told him something was wrong. He took a deep breath and approached her, his heart racing. "Hey, are you okay? You seem a bit off." Finally, she turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I'm fine. Just trying to figure something out," she said, her voice clipped. "Figure what out?" he pressed, his curiosity piqued. "The figure? The footage?" Sarah hesitated, her gaze shifting back to the screen. "It's just," she started, then trailed off, biting her lip as if she were weighing her words carefully. "There's something you need to know, Alex." "What is it?" he asked, his heart pounding as dread crept back into his thoughts. "I've been manipulating the footage," she admitted finally, her voice barely a whisper. "It was all part of my investigation to see how you would react. I wanted to understand your fears, to see if they were as real as you made them out to be." Alex felt the ground shift beneath him, disbelief flooding his senses. What do you mean? You've been lying to me? His voice rose, a mixture of anger and confusion. I didn't want to scare you away from the truth, Sarah exclaimed, her eyes wide with urgency. I thought by creating these illusions, I could push you to confront your fears about the camera and the forest. But it seems like I've gone too far. How could you do this? He spat, hurt clouding his judgment. I came to you for help, for answers. I know. I'm sorry, Alex. But I thought maybe if you faced something that seemed real, it would help you understand what was happening with your camera. I just wanted to guide you. Before she could finish, a chill swept through the clearing, and Alex felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. The atmosphere shifted, heavy and suffocating. Panic surged through him as he turned to look into the darkness beyond the firelight. Sarah, something's out there, he said, his voice trembling. I'm sure it's just an animal, she replied, her tone shaky. But there was a flicker of fear in her eyes as well. No, I mean it, Alex insisted, his heart racing. I can feel it. Suddenly, the fire flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that danced around them. In that moment, they both froze, the air thick with an unnameable tension. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Alex saw it, the shadow figure, standing just beyond the trees, watching them with an intensity that made his blood run cold. It was no longer just a figment of his imagination or a manipulation of footage. This was real. Sarah, he shouted, his voice cracking. Look. They both turned to face the figure, but it was gone, swallowed by the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, his instincts screaming at him to run. We need to get out of here, he urged, panic rising in his throat. No, we can't leave, Sarah pleaded, gripping his arm. We need to understand what's happening. Understand? Are you kidding me? Alex shot back, his voice laced with desperation. We're in the middle of nowhere, and there's something out there that's been haunting me. I'm not sticking around to figure out what it wants. Just then, the air around them grew cold, and a low, rumbling sound echoed through the trees, making the ground tremble beneath their feet. The fire flickered violently again, and Alex felt the encroaching darkness pressing in on them, suffocating and relentless. Alex, please. Sarah's voice was pleading, but he could see the fear mirrored in her eyes. We can face this together. In that moment, the shadow figure manifested once more, emerging from the depths of the forest, its form indistinct but undeniably present. It moved closer, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of the night, and Alex felt a primal instinct take over. Without another word, he turned and bolted into the forest, adrenaline fueling his flight, the sounds of branches snapping behind him echoing in his ears. Alex, wait! Sarah called after him, her voice fading as he sprinted deeper into the woods, the only thought in his mind to escape the terror that had come to life. The shadows closed in around him, and as he ran, he realized that the haunting he had feared was more than a mere figment of his imagination. It was real, and it was coming for him. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the rugged terrain of New Hampshire's White Mountain National Forest. Mike stepped out of his car, taking a deep breath of the crisp, pine-scented air that surrounded him. The anticipation of solitude and inspiration coursed through his veins, blending with the familiar anxiety that lingered at the edges of his mind. He had rented a small cabin, tucked away from the world, an ideal setting for a writer seeking to escape the noise of everyday life. As he approached the cabin, a quaint structure with weathered wooden beams and a stone chimney, he felt a rush of exhilaration. This was his sanctuary, a place where he could immerse himself in his thoughts and let the stories unfold. The forest loomed around him, dense and alive, whispering secrets he was eager to uncover. Mike dropped his bags on the porch and surveyed his surroundings, the towering trees swaying gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling like distant conversations. Perfect, he murmured to himself, a smile creeping onto his face. He stepped inside, the door creaking softly as it swung open. The interior was rustic yet cozy, with a small fireplace, a sturdy wooden table, and a clutter of books lining the shelves. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He wasted no time setting up his writing space. Mike arranged his notebooks, pens, and laptop on the table, creating a makeshift command center for his creative endeavors. The weight of the world outside faded, replaced by the intoxicating promise of inspiration. As he settled into a chair, he could almost hear the words forming in his mind, eager to spill onto the pages. Hours passed, and the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Mike lit a fire in the fireplace, the flames crackling to life and casting flickering shadows on the walls. He poured himself a cup of coffee, savoring the rich aroma as he took a seat by the fire. It was time to write. As he typed, the rhythmic clattering of keys filled the room, but beneath the surface of his focus, a nagging tension brewed. The silence of the forest felt heavy, pressing against him like an unseen force. He glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the cabin remained empty, just him and the crackling fire. "Come on, Mike. Get it together," he muttered, shaking his head. "You wanted solitude, remember?" Just as he began to immerse himself in his story, a faint sound pierced the stillness. It was barely audible, like a whisper carried by the wind. He paused, his fingers hovering above the keyboard. The hair on the back of his neck prickled, an instinctive awareness that something was off. The whisper came again, soft and almost melodic, echoing his name. Mike, his heart raced, and he strained to listen, but the sound was gone, swallowed by the crackle of the fire. He shook his head, dismissing it as a trick of his mind, a figment conjured by the solitude. He forced himself to focus on his writing, the words flowing again, but the whisper lingered at the edges of his consciousness, like a forgotten tune that refused to fade. As night fell deeper, an unsettling chill crept into the cabin. Mike wrapped his sweater tighter around himself, glancing at the window. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the forest outside. Shadows danced among the trees, and for a moment, he thought he saw movement, a flicker of something just beyond the reach of the light. "Stop it," he muttered, shaking his head. "You're being ridiculous." He returned to his writing, but the whisper returned, more distinct this time, almost urgent. "Mike," it sent a shiver down his spine, a chill that settled deep within him. He stood up, pacing the small cabin, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. The walls felt like they were closing in, the isolation pressing against him like a physical weight. "It's just the wind," he told himself, but doubt gnawed at him. "Maybe I should go for a walk," he said aloud, hoping the sound of his own voice would reassure him. "Just a quick one. Clear my head." He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside, the cold air biting at his skin. The forest loomed dark and silent around him, a vast expanse of shadow and mystery. He took a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment, and started down the path that led away from the cabin. The moonlight filtered through the branches, casting silver rays that illuminated the ground ahead. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent his heart racing. He walked further, feeling both exhilarated and unnerved. The forest was alive, but it was a different kind of alive, one that echoed with ancient secrets. "Just enjoy the quiet," he whispered, trying to convince himself. Yet the whisper returned, a soft caress of sound that brushed against his awareness. "Mike," he froze, his breath hitching in his throat. "Hello," he called out, the word tearing from his lips with more urgency than he intended. The only response was the wind sighing through the trees, a low hum that felt almost mocking. "Get a grip," he muttered, turning back toward the cabin, the shadows seeming to stretch and shift around him as he walked. Every rustle felt like a voice, every breeze a whisper meant just for him. He quickened his pace, the sense of isolation pressing heavily on his chest. When he finally reached the cabin, he slammed the door behind him, leaning against it as if to keep the forest at bay. The fire still flickered, a comforting presence against the encroaching darkness. He sank into a chair, heart racing, and tried to shake off the feeling of dread. "Just a trick of the mind," he said, forcing a laugh. "You've been alone too long, Mike. Get a grip." But the laughter felt hollow, echoing in the emptiness of the cabin. The whispers were back, soft yet insistent, a haunting melody that tugged at his thoughts. Mike, the name echoed in the silence, a chilling reminder that he was not as alone as he had hoped. He rubbed his temples, trying to dispel the growing anxiety. "You're being ridiculous," he repeated, but the words felt weak, drowned out by the chorus of whispers that continued to swirl around him. As he sat by the fire, the shadows danced on the walls, and the whispers faded into the crackling of the flames, but the unease lingered. He pulled out his notebook, flipping through the pages filled with half-formed ideas and sketches. Perhaps he could channel this unnerving energy into his writing. Surely, there was a story lurking in the depths of his mind, waiting to be uncovered. Hours passed as he wrote, the fire dying down to embers, but the whispers remained, a constant undercurrent that gnawed at his thoughts. He glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. The cabin was quiet, but the outside world felt alive with unseen forces, the whispers weaving a tapestry of unease that wrapped around him. "Maybe I should have brought someone with me," he muttered, the admission tasting bitter on his tongue. "A friend, a colleague, anyone." The thought spiraled into a deeper dread, a reminder of the isolation he had sought so eagerly. As he closed his notebook, the shadows crept closer, the darkness thickening around him. Mike felt a primal instinct to flee, to escape the encroaching void, but he was rooted to the spot, a rider caught in the web of his own creation. The whispers came again, swirling around him like a tempest, and he felt the weight of the forest pressing against the walls of his cabin. Mike, the name echoed, a haunting melody that filled the silence, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of fear, a realization that perhaps he was not alone in his solitude. The forest was alive, and it was calling to him. The sun broke through the canopy of the towering pines, casting a gentle glow over the forest floor. Mike sat at his makeshift writing desk, the rustic charm of the cabin surrounding him, filled with the scent of aged wood and the faint crackle of the dying embers in the fireplace. The solitude of the White Mountain National Forest enveloped him like a thick blanket, both comforting and disconcerting. He had hoped that the isolation would spark his creativity, allowing him to dive into the depths of his imagination. Yet, an undercurrent of unease tugged at him, a feeling he couldn't quite shake. He glanced at the blank page before him, the cursor blinking impatiently on his laptop. "Come on," Mike, he muttered to himself, running a hand through his tousled hair. You came here to write, not to stare at a screen. With a deep breath, he began typing, pouring his thoughts onto the page. The words flowed initially, but after a mere hour, he found himself pausing, distracted by the surrounding stillness. The forest felt alive, though it was devoid of human presence. Birds chirped in the distance, and the soft rustle of leaves created a symphony of nature's orchestra. Yet, beneath that melody, Mike swore he could hear something else, a faint whisper that seemed to tease the edges of his consciousness. He shook his head, dismissing it as a trick of the wind. After all, he was alone, and the mind had a peculiar way of playing games when faced with such solitude. As the day wore on, Mike made the decision to step outside, hoping that a brisk hike would clear his mind. He laced up his hiking boots and grabbed a bottle of water, setting off on a well-trodden path leading deeper into the woods. The air was fresh, invigorating, and he welcomed the sensation of the cold breeze against his skin. Each step seemed to draw him further from his worries, and he allowed himself to get lost in the tranquility of nature. After wandering for some time, Mike noticed subtle markings on the trees, faint carvings that resembled arrows pointing in a particular direction. What the hell? He murmured to himself, curiosity piqued. He approached one of the trees, running his fingers over the rough bark. The markings were peculiar, almost as if they were forming a trail. I must have stumbled onto some old hiking route, he reasoned, his adventurous spirit igniting. He followed the trail, the whispers from earlier fading into the background as he immersed himself in the beauty of the forest. Hours passed, and as the sun began its descent, Mike realized he had wandered far from his cabin. The once familiar landscape was now a maze of towering trees and underbrush. A flicker of anxiety ignited within him, but he brushed it aside, convincing himself to retrace his steps. The markings were still visible, yet the deeper he ventured, the more disoriented he became. The once inviting woods now held an air of mystery that made his skin prickle. As darkness fell, Mike returned to the cabin, feeling a gnawing sense of unease settling in his gut. He shook off the feeling, dismissing it as mere fatigue. After a quick dinner, he settled into his writing nook, determined to push through the discomfort and channel it into his work. But as night enveloped the forest, the shadows danced ominously outside the windows, and the whispers returned, louder this time. Mike. Mike, the sound sent a chill down his spine. He paused, glancing around the cabin, half expecting to see someone standing just outside the door. Is someone there? He called out, his voice shaky. Silence answered him, thick and suffocating. He swallowed hard, convincing himself it was only his mind playing tricks. He tried to focus on his writing again, but the whispers persisted, weaving through his thoughts. Go outside, Mike, they seemed to beckon, an insistent call that tugged at the very core of his being. He pushed his chair back, the scrape of wood against wood echoing in the otherwise silent room. Get a grip, he scolded himself. It's just the wind. But the whispers grew more compelling, luring him with an allure he couldn't resist. Just a quick look, he muttered, standing up. What's the worst that could happen? He wrapped his jacket tightly around himself and stepped outside into the cool night air. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the trees, illuminating the path before him. Hello, he called out, his voice barely more than a whisper, swallowed by the vastness of the forest. The only response was the rustle of leaves dancing in the soft breeze. A shiver coursed through him, but he pressed forward, drawn by an inexplicable urge to follow the whispers that seemed to swirl around him, enticing and mysterious. As he ventured further into the woods, he felt the weight of isolation pressing down on him. "I'm just being foolish," he muttered, shaking his head. Yet, the echoes of his name reverberated through the trees, each syllable laced with a haunting quality that set his heart racing. "Mike, come." The darkness felt alive, wrapping around him like a cloak. He squinted into the shadows, half expecting to see someone emerge, but the forest remained still, an unyielding sentinel. Panic began to creep in as he took a step back, the realization hitting him that he might have gone too far. "I should head back," he said aloud, trying to convince himself. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if urging him to delve deeper into the heart of the woods. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice breaking the stillness. "Show yourself." The question hung in the air, unanswered, and he felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. He turned to retrace his steps, but the path seemed to have vanished, swallowed by the shadows. "Mike," the voice was clearer now, almost intimate, echoing through the trees as if it were a part of the forest itself. He stumbled, disoriented, his heart racing with fear. "No, no, no," he mumbled, panic rising. "This isn't real." He hurriedly turned in circles, trying to catch a glimpse of the path, but every direction looked the same, an endless sea of dark silhouettes. "Mike," the whisper was closer now, wrapping around him, and he felt an overwhelming urge to run. He sprinted into the darkness, branches clawing at his arms as he barreled through the underbrush, desperate to escape the clutches of the unseen presence that seemed to pursue him. His breath came in ragged gasps, each heartbeat echoing in his ears like a war drum. Suddenly, he stumbled over a root, losing his balance and falling to the ground. The impact jarred him, and he lay there for a moment, catching his breath, the whispers fading into a low hum. "What's happening?" he gasped, scrambling to his feet. He could feel the panic rising within him like a tide, threatening to drown him in its swell. But as he stood, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "Follow us, Mike," they urged, beckoning him forward. He hesitated, torn between the primal instinct to flee and an inexplicable pull to uncover the source of the calls. "No," he shouted, shaking his head as if to dispel the voices. "Leave me alone." In that moment of disarray, the forest seemed to shift around him, the trees leaning in, their branches twisted and gnarled, casting eerie shadows that danced in the moonlight. He stumbled backward, his heart racing as terror flooded his veins. The whispers transformed into a cacophony, echoing his insecurities, his fears, and the loneliness he had tried to escape. "Mike, you're not alone, but you are lost." With a sudden burst of adrenaline, he turned and ran blindly through the forest, branches tearing at his clothes and skin. The night air was thick with a sense of foreboding, each breath a struggle as he fought against the relentless pull of his surroundings. The whispers morphed into taunts, each word a stab at his psyche, unraveling the threads of his sanity. "Run all you want, Mike, but you can't escape." He pushed himself harder, his legs burning, but the trees closed in around him, turning his escape into a nightmare. The more he ran, the more disoriented he became, the familiar landscape twisting into an alien world. The ground beneath him seemed to shift, the path disappearing as if the forest itself were conspiring against him. In a moment of sheer desperation, he tripped again, falling hard against the forest floor. Darkness enveloped him as he lost consciousness, the cacophony of whispers fading into silence, leaving him suspended between reality and the unknown. The night air was thick with silence, wrapping around Mike like a shroud as he stepped out of the cabin. The moon hung low, casting a pale glow over the snow-dusted ground, illuminating the path he had just walked earlier in the day. He stood at the threshold, the door creaking softly behind him, a reminder of the warmth and safety he was stepping away from. The trees loomed tall and foreboding, their branches swaying slightly in the gentle breeze, whispering secrets he couldn't quite decipher. "Hello?" Mike called into the darkness, his voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone there?" His heart raced in his chest, a wild drumbeat of uncertainty and fear. The only response was the rustle of leaves, a soft sigh that seemed to echo his growing anxiety. He took a deep breath, willing himself to calm down, but the feeling of being watched crept over him, prickling the back of his neck. "Just the wind," he muttered to himself, turning his gaze towards the forest. "It's just the wind playing tricks." Yet deep down, he felt a pull, a compulsion to venture deeper into the woods, to follow the whispers that had haunted him since he arrived. He stepped away from the cabin, the crunch of snow beneath his boots breaking the stillness of the night. Each step felt heavy, as if the ground itself was resisting his movement. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches stretching out like skeletal fingers, beckoning him further into the shadows. As he walked, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was alive, that it was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. The whispers, faint and elusive, seemed to weave through the air, wrapping around him like a thread of fog. "Mike! Mike," they called, the sound both seductive and terrifying. "Who's there?" he shouted again, frustration lacing his voice. "Stop playing games." He felt foolish for speaking into the void, but the tension in his chest demanded an outlet. The only reply was another rustle of leaves, and he felt as if the trees were laughing at him, mocking his own fear. Pushing his anxiety aside, he decided to follow the whispers, convinced that they were some sort of sign. "Maybe it's just a trick of the mind," he reasoned, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "Maybe it's just what I need, some inspiration." With every step he took, the whispers grew stronger, urging him deeper into the woods, and he felt an inexplicable pull to obey. The darkness enveloped him, and as he wandered further, the familiar landscape of the forest began to shift. The trees, once recognizable, morphed into an unwelcoming maze. Shadows danced in the corners of his vision, and he felt disoriented, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling around him. Panic began to set in. "This isn't good," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking behind him. As he turned to retrace his steps, the path he had taken seemed to vanish, swallowed by the forest. He cursed under his breath, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I can't believe I'm lost," he groaned, the weight of isolation pressing down on him like a physical force. The whispers intensified, morphing into a cacophony of voices that bounced off the trees, each one more insistent than the last. "Mike, come, follow," the calls resonated in his mind, merging with his racing thoughts. He stumbled forward, desperate to find his way back, but the woods twisted around him, an ever-changing labyrinth. The trees loomed closer, their branches reaching out like hands, clawing at him as he pushed through. "Stop it," he shouted angrily, his voice cracking. "Leave me alone." But the forest only responded with silence, an oppressive quiet that swallowed his words whole. He felt a chill creep into his bones, an icy dread settling in his stomach. The air was thick with a tension he couldn't shake, and the whispers transformed into something darker, more menacing. "Mike! Mike!" they taunted, echoing his insecurities, his fears, and his regret. He stumbled over a root, falling hard onto the ground, the cold earth biting into his skin. "I can't do this," he gasped, panic rising like bile in his throat. "I need to get out of here." He pushed himself up, brushing the snow from his clothes, but the forest felt different now, hostile, almost sentient in its desire to keep him there. As he stood, he could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on him. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Focus, Mike," he whispered, his own voice a lifeline in the sea of chaos. "Just find your way back." But the more he tried to concentrate, the more the whispers grew, swirling around him, pulling him in different directions. "Don't you see?" The voices blended into a single, haunting entity. "You are part of us now." "No," he shouted, his voice breaking the silence with a raw intensity. "I'm not part of anything." But deep down, he felt something shift within him, a flicker of understanding that he didn't want to acknowledge. The whispers were no longer just sounds, they were a call, a beckoning that stirred something in his very soul. He turned again, searching for any sign of his cabin, but the trees seemed to mock him, their twisted branches blocking out the moonlight. "This can't be happening," he whispered, desperation creeping into his voice. "I have to get back." He took a step forward, only to feel the ground shift beneath him, sending him sprawling once more. In that moment of vulnerability, the whispers surged, rising to a crescendo that filled his mind with chaotic sound. "Mike! Mike, you belong here," they echoed, resonating with a familiarity that chilled him to the core. He pressed his hands to his temples, trying to block out the noise, but it seeped into him, a dark tide that threatened to drown him. "Stop," he cried out, the word ripping from his throat. "Just stop." The forest fell silent, but the weight of the moment was suffocating. He felt small and insignificant in the face of whatever force was at play, a mere pawn in a game he didn't understand. Gritting his teeth, Mike pushed himself to his feet, determination igniting a spark within him. "I'll find my way back," he declared, his voice steadier now, even as dread clawed at his insides. He turned in a direction he hoped would lead him back to the cabin, each step taken with a resolve that masked his fear. As he walked, he could feel the whispers lurking in the periphery, waiting for an opportunity to ensnare him once more. The trees closed in around him, their branches entwining like fingers, but he focused on the ground beneath him, on the crunch of snow that grounded him in reality. "I'm not afraid," he whispered, the words a mantra against the growing darkness. But fear began to creep back in, a cold realization settling over him. The forest felt like a living entity, one that was aware of his presence, aware of his every move. He could almost sense the eyes watching him, hidden in the shadows, and his heart raced with the primal instinct to flee. He pushed on, the whispers still tantalizingly close, threading through the air like a ghostly melody. "Mike, come back," they sang, weaving their way into his very thoughts, each syllable a reminder of the isolation that had drawn him into this nightmare. "Shut up," he shouted, the words bursting forth with an intensity that surprised him. "Just leave me alone." And for a moment, the whispers faltered, as if stunned by his defiance. But the silence was short-lived, and soon they returned, louder than before, drowning out his thoughts. "Mike! Mike, remember," they urged, each word a taunt that echoed in the recesses of his mind. "You can't escape your fate, he spat, bitterness lacing his voice. "I make my own fate." But deep down, uncertainty gnawed at him, the weight of his isolation settling heavily on his shoulders. The forest felt like a labyrinth with no exit, a trap designed to ensnare him in its depths. As he stumbled through the underbrush, the whispers grew more frantic, each call more desperate than the last. "You're almost there, just a little further," they beckoned, a siren song that pulled at the very core of his being. He hesitated, torn between the urge to flee and the compulsion to follow. "No," he whispered, shaking his head to clear the fog that clouded his thoughts. "I won't let you control me." With that, he pressed on, fighting against the oppressive weight of the forest, each step a rebellion against the unseen forces that sought to bind him. But as the trees closed in, the whispers morphed into something darker, more insidious, filling the air with a suffocating dread. "You cannot escape," they hissed, their voices intertwining like a serpent wrapping around its prey. "You belong to us." In that moment, panic surged through him, a primal instinct to survive igniting a fire within. He turned, running blindly through the trees, branches clawing at his clothes, the cold air burning in his lungs. "I have to get back," he gasped, each breath a desperate plea for freedom. But the forest seemed to shift, a living entity that toyed with him. Leading him, the forest loomed around Mike like an ancient sentinel, its towering pines whispering secrets that only the wind could understand. As he stumbled through the underbrush, the world he had once known seemed to blur, and every tree appeared to wear a mask of unfamiliarity. He had tried to retrace his steps, to find the path that had led him away from the comforting embrace of his cabin, but the forest had transformed into a labyrinth, each turn leading him deeper into its clutches. "Where am I?" he muttered to himself, his voice breaking the eerie silence. The words felt hollow, swallowed by the vastness of the woods. The whispers, once soft and teasing, had turned cruel, taunting him with echoes of his deepest fears. "Mike! Mike!" they called, each repetition sending a shiver down his spine. They were no longer mere sounds, they had taken on a life of their own, wrapping around him like vines, squeezing his chest with an icy grip. "Shut up," he shouted into the darkness, clenching his fists. "You're not real." But the forest only replied with a soft rustle, as if mocking his defiance. He pressed his palms to his ears, trying to block out the cacophony, but the whispers seeped through, insistent and relentless. He quickened his pace, driven by an instinct to escape, to evade whatever unseen force seemed to stalk him. Branches lashed at him as he pushed through the dense thickets, scratching his arms and face, and he could feel the sweat pooling at the nape of his neck. Panic clawed at him, a wild beast gnashing its teeth. The shadows danced around him, and with every step, he felt more like prey, hunted and helpless. "Maybe if I climb a tree," he thought, desperation flooding his mind. He spotted a sturdy oak nearby, its broad trunk offering a possible refuge. With a surge of adrenaline, he dashed toward it, grasping the rough bark with trembling hands. As he began to ascend, he heard the whispers again, this time infused with a mocking tone. "Climb higher, Mike. You think you can escape? You'll never be free." He grunted, pulling himself up. He reached a sturdy branch and paused to catch his breath, his heart racing like a trapped bird. From this height, he could see a bit further into the forest, a sprawling sea of green, but it only deepened his sense of isolation. The cabin was nowhere in sight, a mere memory lost among the trees. "You can't hide from the truth," the voice echoed, slithering into his mind. "You brought this upon yourself." "Leave me alone," he yelled, the words spilling from his lips like a desperate incantation. He was losing himself, losing the thread of reality that had anchored him just days before. The solitude he had sought had transformed into a nightmare, and he longed for the comfort of human presence, for the sound of a voice that didn't belong to the shadows. With a final push, he climbed higher, but the branch beneath him creaked ominously. Suddenly, it snapped, and he fell, the world blurring into a whirl of greens and browns before everything turned black. When Mike awoke, he was lying on the forest floor, the cool earth beneath him a stark contrast to the heat of his panic. Confused, he blinked against the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. The whispers were gone, replaced by an unsettling silence that felt almost deafening. He sat up slowly, his head spinning, and surveyed his surroundings. "Where am I?" he whispered, his voice a mere tremor in the stillness. The forest looked different now, each tree a looming specter, their branches like arms reaching toward him. He struggled to his feet, his legs shaky and unsteady. "Mike?" A voice broke through the silence. It was a woman's voice, soft yet commanding. He spun around, searching for its source. "Who's there?" he called, his heart racing once more. "I'm here," she replied, stepping into view. She was cloaked in a simple, flowing dress, her hair cascading around her shoulders like dark waves. Her eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to pierce through the veil of his confusion. "You've been lost for a while." I was just trying to find my way back," he stammered, awe and fear mingling within him. "How do you know my name?" "Because I've been waiting for you," she said, a serene smile gracing her lips. "You've been called here, Mike. You're not alone." The words sent a chill through him. "Called? By who?" he demanded, his voice rising. "What do you want from me?" "The forest has secrets," she said, stepping closer. "Secrets that bind us. You're a part of them now." "Part of what?" "I don't understand." His voice cracked, desperation clawing at him. "I just wanted to write. I wanted to be alone." "You wanted to escape," she replied softly. "But solitude has a way of revealing truths we'd rather keep buried." He shook his head, unwilling to entertain her cryptic words. "No, I'm not, Mike, listen to me," she interrupted, her tone suddenly urgent. "You are not the first to hear the whispers. They have called to others before you. You must confront them, or they will consume you." "Confront what?" "I don't even know what's happening." His frustration boiled over. "You're just a figment of this twisted place." "No, I am real," she insisted, her voice rising above his. "The forest is alive, and it knows your fears. It feeds on them. You must face it, or you will lose yourself entirely." "Face what?" "The whispers," he asked, confusion and anger warring within him. They're just echoes." "They are more than echoes," she said, her gaze unwavering. "They are the voices of the past, the memories of those who came before you. You must listen to them. Only then can you find your way back." "Back where?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the trees. "To my cabin? To my life? It's gone. Everything is gone." The woman's expression softened, and she stepped closer, her hand reaching out as if to touch him. "You have not lost everything, Mike. You still have a choice. But you must confront your fears first." "Fears?" he scoffed, backing away. "What do you know about fears? You're just a figment of this damned forest." "Am I?" she asked, tilting her head. "Or am I a part of you? The part that knows the truth but is too afraid to embrace it?" He shook his head violently, trying to dispel her words, but they clung to him like a fog. "No. I won't listen." "Then you will remain lost," she said softly, her voice fading into a whisper. "And the whispers will never let you go." Before he could respond, she melted back into the shadows of the trees, leaving him alone once more in the suffocating silence of the forest. Panic surged within him, and he turned, running in a random direction, branches slapping against his skin as he fled the scene. "Wait," Come back, he shouted, desperation lacing his voice. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees warping and shifting as if they were sentient beings, mocking his every move. The whispers returned, louder than before, swirling around him like a tempest. Mike! Mike, you cannot escape. His heart raced, the sound echoing in his ears as he stumbled, falling to his knees among the undergrowth. He pressed his palms against the cool earth, gasping for breath, feeling the weight of despair settle heavily on his chest. Please, just leave me alone, he cried, the words raw and desperate. But the forest remained unyielding, the whispers growing stronger, more insistent. They echoed his insecurities, his failures, feeding off his fear. Ryder, lost, alone, they chanted. He wanted to scream, to drown them out, to escape the suffocating grip of the forest. But deep down, a flicker of understanding ignited within him. He had sought solitude, but in doing so, he had unleashed something he could not control. With a newfound resolve, he pushed himself to his feet, determination coursing through him. I will not be afraid, he declared into the void. I will not let you win. The whispers faltered, as if taken aback by his defiance. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and began to walk, focusing on each step, each breath, and trying to clear his mind. Perhaps it was time to confront the truths he had avoided for so long. Show me, he whispered to the forest, his voice trembling. Show me what you want me to see. The trees around him seemed to shift, the shadows elongating and twisting, but they no longer felt threatening. Instead, they felt like a pathway, leading him deeper into the heart of the woods. As he walked, the whispers morphed into something more coherent, a symphony of voices weaving through the air. Embrace us, face us, remember. He closed his eyes, letting the voices wash over him, allowing the memories they carried to surface. Images of his past flickered in his mind, his childhood, the laughter of friends, moments of joy intertwined with pain and regret. Mike stirred from the depths of a restless slumber, consciousness creeping back like the hesitant light of dawn. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils, and the faint beeping of machines punctuated the silence, pulling him fully into reality. Disoriented, he blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, struggling to piece together the fragments of his memory. Where was he? As he shifted in the hospital bed, pain flared through his body, a reminder of the fall he couldn't quite recall. His mind was still tangled in the whispers, those haunting echoes that had plagued him in the forest. Panic squeezed his chest as he tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pressed him back down. Easy there, Mike, a nurse said softly, her brown eyes filled with compassion. You've been through quite an ordeal. Just relax. Where am I? He croaked, his voice raspy and unfamiliar. You're in the hospital, she replied, adjusting the blanket around his shoulders. You were missing for 3 days. We found you in the woods. Do you remember anything? The question sent a shudder through him. He could feel the memories fluttering at the edges of his mind like moths around a flame, but every time he reached for them, they flitted away. I remember the whispers, he finally managed, his voice trembling. They called my name. The nurse exchanged a knowing glance with a doctor standing nearby. You're experiencing something called isolation psychosis, the doctor said, stepping forward. It can happen when someone is isolated for extended periods. The mind can play tricks, making it hard to distinguish between reality and imagination. Mike's heart sank. Isolation psychosis. The words hung heavily in the air, thick with implications. Was he truly losing his grip on reality? The whispers that had felt so real, were they just figments of a troubled mind? But I heard them, he insisted, desperation creeping into his tone. They were real. The doctor nodded sympathetically. It's common to feel that way after such an experience. We'll help you process what happened. You're safe now. Safe. The word echoed in his mind, yet it felt hollow. As the medical staff moved about the room, checking on him and adjusting monitors, Mike felt a growing sense of unease. What had happened out there? What had he done to end up in this sterile room, surrounded by strangers? Days passed in a blur of medical assessments and quiet conversations. The whispers that had once haunted him now morphed into a distant memory, replaced by the steady rhythm of hospital life. Yet, despite the mundane surroundings, a sense of dread lingered, coiling in his stomach like a serpent. On the third day, as he was recovering, a journalist appeared at his bedside, eager to capture his story. "Mike, do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" she inquired, her pen poised over a notepad, eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Depends on what you want to know," he replied, his voice still weak. "Everything," she said, leaning closer. "You went missing in the woods. Some say you were wandering for days, lost in the wilderness. Others are calling it a miracle that you survived." "I didn't just survive," he murmured, his mind slipping back to the forest. "I heard something out there. Something calling to me." "Calling to you?" she echoed, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "It was my name," he whispered, recalling the chilling sound, the way it had twisted through the trees like a living thing. "It felt like it wanted something from me." The journalist scribbled furiously, her eyes widening. "That's incredible. Did you feel threatened at all, or was it more of a beckoning?" "Both," he admitted, shaking his head as if to dislodge the memory. "It felt like a trap, but also like a promise." Her expression shifted, a flicker of unease crossing her features. "And you think this is connected to your isolation?" "I don't know," he said, frustration bubbling up. "I just know that I've been changed by this experience. It's like I'm looking at the world through a different lens." "People are fascinated by tales like yours," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know that, right? They want to believe in the extraordinary." "Extraordinary," he repeated, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I was lost, terrified, and nearly dead." "What's extraordinary about that?" "Survivors often become legends, Mike. You could write a book about this, your journey, your experience. It could be a bestseller." The idea settled in his mind, heavy and unwelcome. A bestseller. The thought of pouring his trauma into a narrative felt both compelling and repulsive. "What if I don't want to write about it?" he finally said, meeting her gaze. She shrugged, unfazed. "You don't have to. But it's a story that needs to be told. The world craves the unknown, the mysterious." As she left, Mike felt a knot tightening in his stomach. The whispers, those insistent calls, had returned to the periphery of his thoughts, taunting him with the possibility that they were far more than mere figments of his imagination. They were part of a reality he had yet to confront. Upon his release from the hospital, the media frenzy had already begun. Reporters camped outside his cabin, eager for a glimpse of the man who had defied nature and returned from the brink of madness. Mike, however, was consumed with inner turmoil. Each time he closed his eyes, he could hear the whispers, now almost a familiar presence, weaving through his thoughts like a silken thread. "Mike!" A familiar voice called as he stepped outside, shielding his eyes from the sun. It was his old friend, Sarah, her face a mixture of concern and relief. "I'm so glad you're okay." "Yeah, I'm fine," he replied, forcing a smile as he leaned against the porch railing. "Just trying to process everything." "Processing is good, but you need to talk about it," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "You can't keep this bottled up. It's not healthy." "I know," he muttered, staring into the trees that loomed beyond his cabin. "But every time I think about it, I just hear those whispers again." "What whispers?" she asked, brow furrowing in confusion. "The ones that called my name," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "They were so real, Sarah. It's like they were drawing me in." She stepped closer, concern etched on her face. "Mike, you were isolated for far too long. You were probably just imagining things. You need to focus on getting better." "Better," he echoed, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. "What if I'm not the same? What if those whispers are something more?" "They're just echoes of your mind working through trauma," Sarah reassured him. "You need to write it out. It could be therapeutic." "Write about what?" he snapped, frustration boiling over. "About being lost? About hearing things that aren't there? No one wants to read that." "Maybe not, but people want to understand. You've experienced something most people can't even fathom. You have a voice. Use it." As she spoke, something inside him shifted. He could feel the stirrings of inspiration, a flicker of the creative energy that had initially drawn him to the mountains. The thought of capturing his experience, of turning it into a narrative, ignited a fire within him. But beneath that fire lingered the fear of what he might uncover. "Maybe I will," he said, his voice steadier now. "But I need to understand what happened first." Sarah nodded, her eyes softening. "That's a good start. Just remember, you're not alone in this." As she left, Mike stood in the doorway, staring into the trees that had once felt like a prison. The whispers now felt like a distant echo, yet he knew they would return. He had to confront them, to unravel the connection that tethered him to the forest. That night, as he sat at his desk with a blank page before him, he felt the familiar chill brush against his skin. The whispers stirred, weaving through the shadows of his cabin. "Mike," they beckoned, a siren call that pulled at the very fabric of his being. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered into the darkness, the question more a plea than an accusation. "What do you want from me?" The only response was an eerie silence, thick and suffocating. But deep down, he felt the answer resonating in his bones. It was not merely a call, it was a reckoning. With trembling hands, he began to write, the words flowing like water from a broken dam. The whispers guided him, shaping his narrative even as they haunted him. Each stroke of the pen became an act of defiance against the shadows that threatened to consume him. In that moment, he understood. The whispers were not just a manifestation of his psychosis, they were a link to something greater, a bridge to the part of him he had yet to discover. The whispers were a part of his story, one he was finally ready to tell. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the bustling crowd gathered at the local bookstore in Concord, New Hampshire. Mike sat at a small table, his name embossed on a simple tent card in front of him. He was surrounded by stacks of his best-selling novel, a personal account of his harrowing experiences in the White Mountain National Forest. His heart raced, not from the excitement of the moment, but from an underlying sense of dread that had haunted him since his return from the woods. "Mike! Over here!" A voice broke through the chatter, and he turned to see a familiar face, Sarah, his old college friend. She approached with a warm smile, her enthusiasm a stark contrast to the gnawing anxiety in his gut. "Hey, Sarah," he greeted, forcing a smile as he reached out for a hug. "Thanks for coming. I wouldn't miss it for the world." "I've been dying to hear more about your time in the forest," she said, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. As they chatted, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The crowd buzzed around him, but one figure stood out, a man lurking at the edge of the gathering, his expression inscrutable beneath the brim of his hat. Every time Mike glanced in his direction, the man seemed to vanish into the crowd, only to reappear moments later. "Mike, are you okay?" "You look a little pale," Sarah remarked, her brow furrowing with concern. "Yeah, just a bit tired," he replied, trying to dismiss her worry. He forced himself to focus on the conversation, but his mind drifted back to the whispers that had plagued him. Even now, in the safety of a crowded room, he could almost hear them curling around the edges of his consciousness, teasing him with their echo. As the signing continued, the stranger finally approached. He was tall, with a rugged face that spoke of years spent outdoors. His eyes were piercing, drawing Mike in with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Mike Anderson?" the man asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Yeah, that's me," Mike replied, a knot forming in his stomach. "I've been wanting to talk to you," the man said, leaning closer, his breath carrying the scent of pine and earth. "You're not just a writer now, you're part of something much larger." "What do you mean?" Mike asked, his curiosity piqued despite the discomfort brewing within him. The man's expression shifted, a mix of urgency and gravity. "The whispers you heard, they're not just figments of your imagination. There's a history there, tied to the land you wandered into." Mike felt his heart race at the mention of the whispers. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, a knot tightening in his throat. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out an aged photograph. He handed it to Mike, who hesitantly took it, his fingers brushing against the brittle paper. In the faded image, a woman stood amidst the trees, her features strikingly similar to his own. She wore a long dress, the kind that spoke of the 1800s, and her eyes seemed to stare right through him. "Who is she?" Mike asked, his voice barely a whisper. "That's Eleanor Hawthorne," the man replied, his gaze unwavering. "She was one of the last residents of this land before the forest reclaimed it. Legend has it that she was cursed for her connection to the spirits that dwell there." Mike's mind raced as he studied the photograph. "Cursed? Why? What happened to her?" The man took a deep breath, as if summoning the weight of the tale. Eleanor was known for her beauty and her affinity for nature. But she was also rumored to have dabbled in ancient rituals, trying to commune with the spirits of the forest. The townsfolk turned against her, fearing what they didn't understand. They believed she had unleashed something dark, and when she vanished into the woods, they believed it was the spirits claiming her. "But I'm not her," Mike protested, feeling a chill run down his spine. "This is just a coincidence." The man shook his head. "You bear her likeness, Mike. The whispers you heard, they're a call. The forest remembers, and it's trying to reclaim what was lost." "That's insane," Mike said, his voice rising. "I'm just a writer. I needed inspiration, and I found it in my own madness." "No," the man insisted, leaning closer. "You found a part of yourself that was buried long ago. The forest has a way of revealing truths, and it chose you." Mike felt the weight of the man's words settle in his chest. Memories flooded back, the whispers urging him to come closer, the feeling of being watched, the inexplicable pull he'd felt towards the forest. If this is true, then why me? Why now? Because you're the descendant of Eleanor, the man said, his eyes narrowing. You share her blood. The forest has been waiting for someone to return, to bridge the gap between the past and the present. The bookstore around them faded into the background, the laughter and chatter becoming a distant hum. Mike struggled to process the revelation. But I didn't ask for this. I just wanted to write. Writing is a powerful medium, the man replied, his tone softening. It can bind the past to the present. You have the ability to tell her story, to break the cycle of the curse. What do you want from me? Mike asked, feeling overwhelmed. I can't just go back there. The forest, it almost consumed me. Perhaps it's time to confront it, the man suggested. You need to understand what happened to Eleanor, and in doing so, you may free yourself from the whispers that haunt you. I can't go back, Mike said, shaking his head vehemently. I can't risk losing myself again. The man's expression softened, a hint of empathy breaking through his stern demeanor. You won't be alone. You can take the first step by researching her story. Find her grave, uncover the truth. The forest will reveal itself to you when you're ready. Mike's thoughts raced as he considered the implications. The whispers had been a torment, a reminder of his darkest moments, but could they also be a guide? What if I find something I don't want to know? He asked, his voice trembling. Knowledge is power, Mike. You can choose to confront it or let it consume you, the man replied. But remember, the whispers you hear are not just warnings. They're a call to reclaim your identity. As the conversation lingered in the air, Mike felt a flicker of hope amid the dread. He had spent months battling the shadows of his past, but now, perhaps, he could turn them into something meaningful. Okay, he said, his voice steadying. I'll do it. I'll find her story. The man nodded, a faint smile breaking through his serious demeanor. That's the spirit. The forest awaits. With that, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the throng of fans eager to meet their author. Mike stared at the photograph, the image of Eleanor etched into his mind. The shadows of doubt and fear still loomed over him, but for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose igniting within. Mike, are you ready for the next one? Sarah's voice pulled him back to the present, her enthusiasm infectious. Yeah, I think so, he replied, a newfound determination settling in his chest. I think I have a story to tell. As the day wore on, the whispers faded into the background, replaced by the buzzing excitement of the signing event. Yet, deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The forest still held its secrets, and he was ready to uncover them, one echoing whisper at a time.